Chapter 198. I'm a step too late. Looking at the two bodies of the alien creatures nearby, Kale shrugged helplessly. Soon, he seemed to have noticed something and his eyes unexpectedly fell on the body of the silver-armored soldier. With a thought, a few item cards quickly appeared and the detailed information of the cards appeared in front of him. Wuru Longsword, a longsword with very little Wuru metal. Blue item card. Wuru is a metal unique to the Divine Dominion. It is hard, malleable, and highly compatible with divine power. This one-handed longsword is mainly made of silver with very little Wuru metal. The blade is extremely sharp. It can be attached with divine power to greatly increase the ability to kill enemies. Current status, can be drawn. Wuru armor, armor with very little Wuru metal. Blue item card. The whole set of armor is mainly made of silver and very little Wuru metal. It is comfortable and sturdy. After being attached with divine power to activate, it can obtain a certain degree of physical and elemental resistance. Current status, can be drawn. Wuru metal from the Divine Dominion. Kale muttered to himself and stretched out his left hand. After 3 seconds of reading time, the silver longsword in the belly of the ugly monster instantly disappeared. At the same time, an item card quietly appeared in his hand. The image of the longsword and information was printed on the front. Vice was already used to this. He still kept his sunglasses on Kale's forehead and sent out radio waves to the surrounding wilderness to search for anything suspicious. Kale's movements did not stop. He summoned the card in his hand and the longsword appeared again in his left hand out of thin air. Throughout the entire process, he did not even take half a step away from the motorcycle. It looked like he was casting a spell to retrieve items from a distance. Kale simply operated his divine power. The blazing flames immediately spread from his arm to the hilt and the body of the longsword. However, under the envelopment of the divine flame that was close to 1,000 degrees Celsius, not only did the silver longsword not show any signs of melting, but the dirt and blood on it had all evaporated. The body of the longsword became more and more transparent. The flames formed by the divine power naturally attached to the Wuru longsword. The two perfectly matched together as if there was some kind of chemical reaction. The originally ordinary-looking silver sword turned into a dazzling flaming laser sword. Master, is this a divine artifact? Even Vice could not help but be amazed by this magical scene. He was unable to analyze the data in his system and come up with the relevant scientific evidence and conclusions. No. This is just a weapon with a little bit of black metal mixed in. It's still far from being a divine artifact. Kyle shook his head gently and dispersed his divine power. Looking at the longsword in his hand, he sighed with emotion. Just a little bit of the black road that was compatible with divine power was enough to make the silver sword break away from the ordinary grade and enter the ranks of blue-grade items. Compared to Earth's vibranium and sodium carbon steel, this Wulu metal was definitely more precious. However, the weapons made by Wuru could only be used by creatures with godly power. Of course, this was not what Kale was most concerned about. Vice, we need to expand our search area. We must find living extraterrestrial lifeforms. Kale's eyes flashed as he said in a deep voice. The weapons and equipment forged by Wu Lu were naturally the standard equipment of God's domain soldiers. And with Divine Realm soldiers appearing on this ancient battlefield, it proved that this planet still had a close connection with the Divine Realm. Understood. I will maintain the transmission of radio waves and search for all lifeforms within 10 kilometers. I will also search for scientific instruments that have their own signals. Vice said. Kale nodded and started the motorcycle. After kicking up a cloud of dust, he continued to drive forward at high speed. It seemed like they were driving aimlessly in the wilderness. In fact, Kale and Vice were working together to search for any signs of suspicious lifeforms. Half an hour later, Kale drove the motorcycle and quickly passed by another white bone wilderness. Just as he was feeling depressed from the lack of results, a green light prompt appeared on the inside of his sunglasses. Vice report was then heard. Master, I have detected an abnormality in a place. What abnormality? I hope it's useful information. Kale asked quickly. Vice replied, I'm not sure about the exact situation. The radio waves I sent out were very close to that place. It seems to have been affected by some strong electromagnetic interference. The electrical source is close to the surface and fluctuates between high and low. It's very unstable. I don't think it's caused by natural lightning. Guide me there. Kale did not hesitate and gave the order decisively. After receiving the route from Vice, he stomped on the ground with his left foot. The motorcycle that was traveling at high speed was lifted up high. It did a beautiful drift in the air and quickly adjusted the front of the motorcycle. As soon as it landed on the ground, it sped toward the left without slowing down. Now that he was at least a divine realm creature, he did not need to be as cautious as he used to be when he faced any situation in outer space. In just a short while, Kale drove the motorcycle and approached the area that Vice had guided him to. Before he reached the center of the electrical source, he sharply sensed that there was a fierce aura in the air. Boom! The thunderclouds in the sky were gloomy and unpredictable. From time to time, thunder would strike. Amidst the dense thunder, there was a faint roar of a wild beast. Kale slowed down the motorcycle and sped up a small hill. When he reached the top, he braked and stopped. He kept the motorcycle in the card space and lowered his body to hide. He looked down and saw a golden-haired young man and a creature as large as a small mountain on a plain 50 meters away from the hillside. Their bodies were completely disproportionate in size as they confronted each other. The golden-haired young man's face was rough and bold. His appearance was similar to a human's. He wore a metal helmet that resembled two horns on his head. His tall and strong body was covered in silver armor and a red cape that fluttered in the wind. The thunder in the sky struck the young man's body. Flashing blue lightning intertwined outside the armor and served as a foil to his strong body. He looked like the immortal and invincible Thor. It was not that he looked like him. He was definitely Thor. Bang! The golden-haired young man held a small hammer in his hand and spun it like a windmill. As he swung the hammer forward, it lifted his body off the ground and flew into the sky. He rushed to the front of the huge creature, surrounded by thunder and lightning, and swung his hammer down with the force of 10,000 pounds, smashing it on the head of the truck-sized monster. The huge monster howled and fell to the ground. Thor, Thor. Kale blinked and looked at the familiar figure. This time, he was really shocked. These days, the Protoss were everywhere? He had just killed one and now another one appeared. And it was Thor, Thor. The role of this hammer was no less than his comrade Captain America. In the final battle against Thanos in the future, he, who had awakened as the King of Gods, was the only main character who could defeat Thanos with the Infinity Glove. Vice, I think I've found a way to return to Earth. Kale pondered for a moment and suddenly said with a smile. How did he get out of Earth? The teleportation ability of the Dimensional Stone. In an instant, he crossed millions of planets from Earth to planet Sokka on the other side of the universe. Although the Dimensional Stone was lost when he was traveling through the universe, in the world of Marvel, teleportation was not the exclusive function of the Dimensional Stone. For example, the Rainbow Bridge used by the Divine Realm's Immortal Palace. How can I borrow Thor's Rainbow Bridge? Kale narrowed his eyes and hid on the side of the hillside. He looked at Thor, who was holding a hammer and surrounded by thunder and lightning. He began to think of his own abacus and plan. In the fierce battle in the wilderness. Chapter 199. The alien creature that Thor was fighting with Thor looked like a lizard that had been enlarged 100 times. It was nearly 8 meters tall and 30 meters long. It had 3 pairs of black wings on its back that could block out the sun. Its entire body was covered in tough and thick black scales and lumps. When it stood on all fours on the ground, it looked like a steel fortress that stretched across the plains. It looked a bit like the evil black dragon that was recorded and described in Western myths on Earth. However, it was much uglier than what was described in the myths. After taking a full blow from Thor's hammer, a small area of the scales on the black dragon's head shattered, forming a hammer-shaped crater. There were still electric sparks left on the surface of the black dragon's head. Smelly black blood gushed out from the wound and dripped onto the ground. However, with its huge body, this injury could only be considered a superficial wound. The black dragon's dark red eyes widened in anger. Its bright red pupils reflected Thor's figure in front of it. Suddenly, it raised its head and roared at the sky. Roar! The dragon's roar shook the wilderness, forming a physical sound wave attack. Air waves and dust exploded outwards. Even Kale, who was 50 meters away, felt pain in his eardrums. He couldn't help but cover his ears. If it was any other god, they might have taken the initiative to retreat. Unfortunately, the alien creature that looked like a black dragon was facing Thor. Thor was a rough man with tough nicknames like Mang Z and Hammer God. "Come on. I'm not afraid of you," Thor shouted provocatively at the black dragon. He swung the Thor's hammer in his hand and turned into a flash of blue lightning. He took the initiative to attack the black dragon creature that was dozens of times larger than himself. The black dragon was one of the overlords of this planet. How could it tolerate the provocation of an outsider? It roared and flapped its wings furiously. Its huge body quickly rose into the air and engaged in close combat with Thor. The battle between a god and an ancient creature had just begun. Hiding behind the hillside, Kale suddenly took out a bag of sunflower seeds. He ate them while patiently observing the battle. Now was not the right time. When it came to borrowing Asgard's Bifrost, the simplest and most direct way was to make friends with the son of Odin, Thor. So the question was, how could he make friends with God in a short time? Kale thought for a while and quickly came up with a cliché idea: the hero saves the damsel in distress. This trick was not only useful for women, but also for men. He had tried to trick Steve on the spot and succeeded. As the saying goes, since ancient times, deep feelings were unreliable, and only tricks could win people's hearts. When Thor is about to die, I'll step in and make him owe me a favor. Kale thought to himself, his gaze never leaving the intense battle in front of him. The electromagnetic field raged violently, and sand and gravel flew everywhere. A storm formed within a 50-meter radius of the battlefield. Any ordinary creature that entered this area would be pierced by the gravel or the flowing electricity. Thor and the primordial black dragon could be considered as powerful creatures in the entire universe. The battle between the two of them was several times more tragic than what he had seen in the Sokka arena. Boom! The black dragon's body was covered in blood. The more serious the injury, the crazier and wilder it became. It twisted its body fiercely in the air, and with a swing of its tail, it sent Thor flying away like a fly. The helmet shattered, and Saul flew out with a painful groan. He was thrown 50 meters away like a meteor, and his speed didn't decrease at all as he crashed into the front of the hill where Kyle was. The gravel collapsed and sank into the mountain. Kale used his stealth skill just in case. He turned into a black mist and disappeared from the spot. In less than half a second, Thor rushed out of the mountain as if nothing had happened. His long blonde hair fluttered behind him in a domineering manner. He relied on the Thor's hammer in his hand to fly at supersonic speed and kept approaching the black dragon. In the air, he held the Thor's hammer high in his right hand like a lightning rod. The thunder in the sky roared and struck the Thor's hammer. It was transmitted to the armor and the body to increase the power. Thor's eyes were sharp. He arrived at the black dragon that was hovering at a low altitude and swung the Thor's hammer from above. The thunder pierced through the black dragon's wings and burned them. Black blood splashed like rain. The black dragon howled in pain and its huge body fell onto the ground. The ground shook slightly. Thor was panting heavily. He swung the Thor's hammer again and again, leaving big and small wounds on the black dragon's body. This alien monster isn't strong enough. Seeing that Thor had the upper hand, Kale threw away the sunflower seeds in his hand. He frowned and fell into deep thought. If this continued, Thor would kill the black dragon alone. There would be no room for him to fight. In fact, it was not that the black dragon was weak. It was just that Thor was too strong. As the son of the Odin god king, Thor has the best and purest genes and bloodline of the Protoss. The embodiment of his divine power is the thunder and lightning that represents destruction. Coupled with the artifact Thor's hammer and the natural thunder and lightning, now, even if Kale were to face Thor, the result would not be much better than the black dragon. This is not the way to go. Kale thought for a moment. Suddenly, he had an idea. He pulled out a creature card. With the summon, a black liquid appeared on his palm. "Venom, have you recovered?" Kale asked. His fingers rubbed Venom's soft body. Venom did not respond to his cries and kneading. It was like a slime sleeping quietly. "Master. Its life signs are too weak. It should be too exhausted in the battle in the duel and will not wake up for a while. Even if it wakes up, it will take some time to recuperate and recover." Vice whispered back. Kale looked at Venom on his right hand and hesitated. He pulled out another item card with his left hand. The card turned into a green bean between his two fingers. "You got lucky." Kale felt a little heartache. He broke the senzu bean into two and stuffed half of it directly into Venom's body. The next moment, the senzu bean's function immediately took effect. Venom's body squirmed linearly and touched Kale's arm with countless black tentacles, conveying joy and happiness to him. Kale breathed a sigh of relief. He glanced at it and ordered, "Now, there is something you need to do immediately." 3 seconds later. On the hillside where Kale was, a shallow black shadow slid on the ground and sneaked into the battle without anyone noticing. In the battle that was about to end, the black dragon creature lay on the ground and struggled weakly. Thor stood on its head, gasping for breath and raising the blood-stained Thor's hammer in his hand. "It's over." Thor swung the hammer vigorously and was about to give the black dragon a final blow. But at this moment, the black dragon suddenly opened its eyes and stood up as if it had been injected with chicken blood. It threw Thor off its head. "Huh. This is..." Thor held Thor's hammer and stopped his body in the air. In his shocked and puzzled eyes, the black dragon below twitched and trembled. A layer of dark biological armor emerged on the scarred dragon body, forming a double surface protection with the scales. The already sharp claws and fangs were now more than 3 meters long, shining with a cold black light. As if it had received an evolution buff, the black dragon beast's eyes glowed with a scarlet light. Its decadent and exhausted weak breath rose steadily and soon surpassed the original fixed peak of adulthood. It let out a deafening dragon roar towards Thor in the air. Chapter 200. What the hell is going on? Thor was dumbfounded. His eyes were wide open as he cursed in his heart. He had fought a tough battle to his heart's content, and his energy was almost depleted. He was prepared to deal the final blow so that he could return to the divine territory to take a bath and rest, but the ancient creature he was fighting had not only recovered to full health, but had also become stronger. It had not changed for thousands of years, and now it had suddenly evolved. "Are you kidding me?" Thor did not have time to think. The black dragon had already flapped its 2 remaining wings, and in a sandstorm, its huge dragon body charged at him rapidly. It opened its bloody mouth and bit at him with its fangs. "This bastard!" Thor's expression changed drastically. He threw Thor's hammer forward with all his might. The hammer hit the black dragon's jaw hard, causing the mouth to close. However, the black dragon was still charging forward at high speed. Thor's palms pressed against the black dragon's jaw, and the black dragon suddenly slid down towards the ground. This caused Thor's back to be pressed against the ground. He dug his feet into the ground and tried to stop himself. Just like that, under the black dragon's charge, Thor's body plowed a deep trench 10 meters long on the ground. Then, he was sent flying. Its defense, strength, speed, and so on have all increased by more than one level. With my divine power exhausted, I can't beat it. Thor was thrown in the air. His face was full of shock. He struggled to open his right palm. Following his summons, the Thor's hammer that he had thrown out flew back in a straight line. 5 fingers holding the handle of Thor's hammer, Thor controlled the direction of his flight to pull away. He wanted to escape from the black dragon. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. However, before he could fly 10 meters, with the sound of wind breaking behind him, a few black tentacles shot at him. Thor, who was flying with the Thor's hammer, was caught off guard and tied up all 4 of his limbs. The tentacles tightened their grip, and Thor's palm loosened its grip. The hammer of Thor fell straight to the ground. Before he could summon it again, the black tentacles had already wrapped around his wrist and palm. It's over. Thor smiled bitterly. He looked back and saw that the other end of the tentacle was connected to the black dragon's body. The black dragon suddenly flapped its wings and dragged Thor into the sky. Then, it suddenly descended and threw his body onto the ground. It flew in circles at a low altitude, dragging Thor with it as it continued to plow the ground. On the hillside not far away, a black shadow quietly appeared. "It's about time," Kyle said to himself as he shrugged and stroked his chin as he looked at the situation that had turned around. It was a very simple logic. Since there was no chance, he had to create one. Now, the opportunity had come. Damn it. Thor was extremely depressed as he was dragged along the ground by the black dragon. He forcefully pulled the black tentacles and even used his teeth in an attempt to free one of his hands to control the hammer of Thor. However, the tentacles were unexpectedly tough. Coupled with the fact that they were constantly moving, it was really difficult for him to free himself. Just as Thor was at a loss, he suddenly heard the roar of a mechanical engine. The sound was getting louder and louder. It was clearly approaching him quickly. This is... Thor looked up in confusion and saw a 2-wheeled motorcycle. The driver was a silver-haired young man wearing sunglasses. The motorcycle charged into the sandstorm at high speed, ignoring the black dragon's roar as it approached him. "I'm here to save you." The silver-haired young man reminded him loudly like a warm-hearted person. "Don't come any closer. You'll be killed." Thor's expression changed slightly, but his warning was too late. Roar. The black dragon noticed the silver-haired young man's presence. It lowered its body and swept its tail across. Instantly, a hurricane howled and sand billowed as it attacked the silver-haired young man on the motorcycle. Good performance. Cough cough, it should be. You came at the right time. Kale coughed to cover it up. Instead of retreating, he sped up and suddenly raised the front of the motorcycle at the highest speed. The motorcycle seemed to have grown wings as it leaped high into the air. The black dragon's tail swept right under the motorcycle's wheels. The rear wheel landed first. Kale drove the motorcycle and kicked up a lot of dust. Under Thor's surprised gaze, the motorcycle came to a stop in front of him. Kyle's face was cold and expressionless. He looked down at Saul, who was on the ground, and pressed the button on the motorcycle. The weapon on the front of the motorcycle spat out a column of flame. The black tentacles of the black dragon were burned by the flame and instantly melted like snow. Get on. Kale started the motorcycle and twisted the handle to refuel it. Thor, who had just broken free from the tentacles, subconsciously flipped over and sat on the motorcycle. With the roar of the engine, the motorcycle immediately sped off. In less than half a second, the black dragon's forelimbs slammed into the ground, creating a large crater. The black dragon's scarlet beast eyes stared at the motorcycle in the distance. It flapped its wings and flew at a low altitude, breathing out hot air from its bloody mouth. It roared and chased after the motorcycle relentlessly. "Thank you, for saving me." Thor gasped for air as he clutched his chest armor with lingering fear. "Who are you? How dare you provoke such a monster?" Kale pretended not to know and asked. Be careful." Before Thor could finish, Kale suddenly changed direction. The black dragon's claw narrowly missed the motorcycle. The strong wind and sand scraped against their backs. "It's too fast. If this continues, we'll all become its meal." Kale shouted in fear. "Watch me." Saul nodded and opened his left palm. In less than a second, Mjolnir fell back into his hand from its master's hand. "Little brother, come with me," Thor said. Before Kale could reply, his empty hand grabbed the back of Thor's collar. Both of them flew forward under the momentum of Thor's hammer. Gotcha! The sharp claws fell and the motorcycle instantly turned into a pile of scrap metal. The black dragon roared angrily, flapped its wings and chased after them in the air. "Can't you hurry up?" Being dragged by Thor in the air, Kale was terrified. He turned around and looked at the black dragon that maintained a distance of about 5 meters. Hot air was coming out of its nose. Thor's hammer is already at its limit. Thor gritted his teeth, took a deep breath and shouted, "Heimdall! Can you see? Teleport us back." "Heimdall!" Thor shouted for the second time. A rainbow beam of light suddenly fell from the gloomy sky and enveloped him and Kale in the air. "It's done." Seeing the familiar rainbow bridge light up, Kyle let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly moved his mind. Saul didn't notice that the black dragon chasing after them was twitching and trembling. A black shadow turned into a card that others couldn't see and entered Kyle's body like a stream of light. In the next moment, the rainbow bridge brought the two of them across the vast universe at a speed 10 million times faster than the speed of light. Chapter 201. In just a moment, the Bifrost took Thor and Kale across thousands of planets. All the colorful universe scenery turned into a blurry stream of light and retreated at an extremely fast speed. A moment ago, they were still in the White Bone Wilderness, a non-life planet at the edge of the universe, being chased by an ancient creature. In the next moment, the scene before Kyle's eyes lit up slightly, and he noticed that he was within a grand and magnificent circular hall. The outer walls and floor seemed to be completely made of polished gold, and they were glossy and reflective, and they were filled with an ancient and divine aura. In the center of the golden hall, a black uncle wearing an exquisite and thick golden armor stood firmly on the platform, waiting. He held the hilt of the long sword with both hands and inserted it into the socket in the middle of the high platform like a key. White lightning intertwined and transmitted to the surrounding outer wall, causing the outer wall to spin quickly like a top. At the inner end of the circular hall, the Bifrost was sent out from the port. At this time, because the two had successfully returned, the rotation speed of the outer wall was slowing down. The colorful light and electric light of the Bifrost were also gradually dimming. Huff! That was close. "Thank you, Heimdall." After loosening his 5 fingers that were grabbing Kale's collar and confirming that they had returned to the divine realm, Thor was completely relieved. His chest was still heaving up and down, and his empty hand wiped the sweat on his forehead. "This is what I should do. It seems that your investigation of the ancient battlefield did not go well." Heimdall's voice was steady and powerful, echoing slightly in the hall. As the guardian of the divine realm who guarded and was in charge of the Bifrost's gate, his attitude towards Thor was neither servile nor overbearing. Yes, there was an accident. There was a newborn ancient creature that seemed to have evolved. It actually broke through itself at the critical moment. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. Just let the soldiers pay attention in the future. Thor shrugged helplessly. Obviously, he had suffered a lot just now. He was unwilling to talk about this embarrassing incident that could be regarded as a black mark of the divine realm. Thor, who was invincible in the universe battlefield, was pressed to the ground by an alien creature. If this was spread out, it would be the laughing point of the divine realm soldiers for a year. This is... Heimdall raised his eyes and stared unwaveringly at Kale. His eyes were deep and bright, and his tanned face became serious. "Oh, I almost forgot." Thor scratched his head and pointed at Kale. "I met this person on the ancient battlefield. He helped me escape from the ancient creature's restraint. His name is..." He paused, glanced at Kale, and asked curiously, "Right, who are you?" He was indeed a thick-skinned and rough man. Kale cursed in his heart. He smiled calmly and said, "My name is Kale. I am a human from Earth." "Earth? Human? I seem to have some recollection of this." Thor was doubtful. However, he was not good at using his brain, and it was painful for him to recall his distant memories. Heimdall could not stand it any more and reminded him, "Your Highness, a few hundred years ago, His Majesty Odin led an army to Earth. At that time, it was to fight against the foreign frost giants who tried to plunge Earth back into the Ice Age. The distance between Earth and the ancient battlefield is almost endless. It is separated by two worlds and the Milky Way. Without the Rainbow Bridge, even with the most advanced spaceship, it would still take more than 10 years to reach Earth." Heimdall stared at Kale with his deep eyes. He did not hide his vigilance and suspicion. "Oh, right, right." Thor nodded and asked in surprise, "Human from Earth, why did you appear on the planet of the ancient war?" Kyle, on the other hand, was already prepared. He calmly used the Rubik's Cube that appeared on Earth and the wormhole on planet Sokka as an excuse. These things all had the ability to cross the universe, so half-truths were enough to fool them. "So you're saying that you're very unlucky?" Thor laughed loudly, naively believing Kale's explanation. Only Heimdall's face was still tense. However, this was normal. He would maintain a high level of vigilance and suspicion towards anyone who entered or exited the Rainbow Bridge in the Divine Realm. "Speaking of which, who are you people? Where is this place?" Kale pretended not to understand and said anxiously, "My spaceship is broken. If you have an interstellar spaceship, can you help me return to Earth?" "We're not using a spaceship." Thor smiled. After thinking for a moment, he asked Heimdall, "Can you open the Rainbow Bridge and send him back to Earth?" Kale looked at Heimdall expectantly. Under the gazes of the two, Heimdall shook his head and replied, "According to the rules of the Divine Realm, those who are not of the Divine Realm cannot open the Rainbow Bridge for them. He saved me. Can you make an exception for me?" Thor had an idea. "Right, how about this? I'm going to Earth now to help open the Rainbow Bridge to Earth." "Your Highness. This is the rule. As the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, I can't make an exception. You can ask His Majesty Odin for instructions. Once I get the password, I will immediately open the Rainbow Bridge," Heimdall said rigidly. When Thor heard Odin's name, he restrained his arrogance and said to Kale apologetically, "I'm sorry. If you want, you can visit the Divine Realm. I'll see my father later and send you home after I get the password." "No problem." Kale nodded. He sighed in his heart that Thor's status was not high enough. It should be because Odin had not publicly announced that he would be the next king of the Divine Realm, so it was so troublesome to open the Rainbow Bridge now. However, the plan was still going smoothly. It was only delayed slightly. Compared to driving a spaceship and traveling back and forth in the universe, it was better to wait for the Rainbow Bridge to open and return to Earth in an instant. And for Asgard, Kale had been looking forward to it for a long time. He had no reason to refuse a day trip to the Divine Realm. Thor took Kale out of the hall of the Rainbow Bridge door and walked out of the door. A physical rainbow bridge with flowing lights and colors extended straight ahead. Kale stood at the door and stopped. Below the rainbow bridge was a turbulent ocean. The sky above was shining with the brilliance of the sun, moon, and stars. At the end of the line of sight was a great city between heaven and earth. Tall buildings made entirely of gold stood tall and straight, like the immortal mansion of a god, shining with an inextinguishable divine radiance. In the air, there were also mysterious square buildings suspended. Everything was full of mystery and strangeness, making people marvel. "I haven't answered your question just now." Thor spread out his hands and said heartily, "My name is Thor. Thor, son of the god King Odin. This is the divine realm at the top of the universe, Asgard. In front of you is the immortal palace, where we live in the divine realm." Chapter 202. The King of Gods, Odin, Thor, these are all gods in the mythical teleportation, so they really exist in this world? Kyle let out a gasp of surprise, his handsome face full of shock. "You are the first human to enter the divine dominion since ancient times. Of course, other than the people from the divine dominion, there are not many races in the universe that can set foot here." Thor looked at Kale calmly, smiled and said, "Through the divine dominion rainbow bridge, we can go to any corner of the 9 realms in an instant." Kale's heart moved slightly. Thor's name for the universe was 9 realms. This was a little thought-provoking. The 9 realms here were also called the 9 great countries, star regions. It represented the territory that Odin led Asgard to conquer and recover for hundreds of thousands of years. It was the territory of most of the universe, including the Milky Way. The universe was basically divided into these 9 star regions, which were the divine dominion, the human world, the flame giant world, the frost giant world, the night elf world, the undead world, the dwarf world, the light elf world, and the home world of the wise ones. The Milky Way, including Earth, was only an extremely small part of the human world. Although the 9 star regions were in the same universe, due to the space membrane between them, it was impossible to use ordinary spaceships to travel to and from the other side. They could only use the rainbow bridge, space wormhole, space jump, and other methods. Usually, the Asgard of the divine dominion that ruled the 9 realms would not interfere with the civilization wars within the star regions. Only when a race from one world broke through and invaded another world would the divine dominion lead the army to suppress it. For example, a few hundred years ago, the race from the frost giant world invaded the human world of Earth. This was the bottom line that Odin could not tolerate. Thor walked in front, leading Kale halfway to the rainbow bridge. The sound of horse hooves came from the front. It was a bearded man in silver armor who rushed to the front on a horse. The tall and strong white horse stopped about 5 meters in front of the two. The bearded man nimbly turned over and dismounted, the armor that reflected the light clanking. He respectfully knelt on one knee to salute Thor. "Your Highness, you are back." "Yes." Thor nodded and introduced the bearded man to Kale. "This is my deputy, Field." Field raised his head proudly. His face was even more rugged than Thor's. His thick black beard made him look like he had been through a lot. His body was full of murderous intent and divine power. Divine power? Kale nodded. With a thought, the cards on Field's body suddenly appeared. Other than the hundreds of white and green ability cards, there was also a blue ability card that was exceptionally dazzling. It represented the main genetic ability of his race. Asgard genes, the racial genes of the commoners of the Asgard divine realm. Rare blue ability card. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, the earliest group of humans in the human world were moved to Asgard by Odin. Their evolution speed far exceeded that of humans, and they broke away from the category of the original human race and became an independent new race. Their strength, speed, physique, vitality, and natural lifespan were 5 times that of normal humans. They had extraordinary physical and elemental resistance, and they had a certain affinity with divine power and magic power. Interesting. Kale's eyes lit up. The physique and genes of the commoners of Asgard were almost the same as super soldiers. More importantly, they were clearly not of the god race. Why did they have such a strong divine power? It was similar to the soldiers he had met in the ancient battlefield. They also had obvious divine power. It's borrowed divine power. Does Odin have a way to bestow divine power to others? Kale thought to himself. He and Thor both had complete god race genes. They could create divine power at any time, and they could control divine power with ease. Thus, they had hidden it in their bodies. Until now, even Thor did not realize that he was also of the god race. Deputy Field was different. The divine power on this person was too obvious. It was as if he had been infected. Once he used it, he could not use it himself. This is a human from Earth, Kale. He just saved my life. Thor introduced Kale to Field. When Field heard the first half of the sentence, he disdained it. When he heard the second half, he looked at Kale in disbelief. A mere human saved Prince Thor. In the face of doubt, Thor nodded again. He patted Kale's shoulder and said, although he's a human, his bravery is no less than that of our soldiers. Field was still a little unconvinced. Suddenly, he thought of something and quickly reported, Your Highness. His Majesty is looking for you now. He asked me to tell you to go to the palace quickly. Father is looking for me? Why didn't you say so earlier? Thor was shocked. He grasped Thor's hammer tightly and floated up. He said to Field in the air, Deputy, Kale is my distinguished guest. Show him around the divine territory. After that, with Father's permission, I will send him back to Earth using the Rainbow Bridge. Before he finished speaking, Thor's red cloak flapped in the wind. He quickly flew to the Golden Palace at the highest point. Yes, Deputy. Field accepted the order helplessly. He stood up from the ground and looked at the silent Kale in front of him. He waved his hand and said, This way, please. Then I'll have to trouble you. Kale smiled faintly and followed Field from the Rainbow Bridge to the Golden City where the Asgardians lived. Entering the Golden City, the city was more peaceful than expected. Along the way, there were soldiers in silver armor and holding silver spears patrolling quietly. On the bustling streets, the civilians, regardless of gender, were mostly dressed in vintage robes. Their faces were filled with happy smiles and gentleness. As the ruler of the 9 realms, Asgard had not been involved in any war for tens of thousands of years. It was a paradise independent of the universe. However, when Field passed by the streets, the citizens all cast doubtful glances at Kale beside him. There were only tens of thousands of civilians in Asgard. They were very sensitive to unfamiliar faces, especially when Kale was dressed in a leather jacket and jeans. You are the first human to enter the divine realm. This is a great honor. If you can return to your home planet, you can brag about it for the rest of your life. There was a hint of mockery in Field's tone. He was not very interested in the weak human race. Kale did not mind. He looked around and asked, Asgard doesn't seem to be pursuing technology. Do they only use cold weapons to conquer foreign battlefields? Firearms are something that only weak creatures rely on. Field snorted and said proudly, We Asgardians are born with outstanding physiques. Together with refined weapons and the support of divine power, we are invincible against any enemy force. Impressive. Kale gave Field a thumbs up. This made Field even more arrogant. He secretly worked with the Vice to figure out the structure of Asgard's forces. Every divine realm soldier had the physique of Captain America. Together with the semi-divine weapon that was not inferior to the vibrating golden shield, and gods like Odin and Thor, this was not an existence that ordinary races could fight against. Chapter 203. A winged Pegasus that can travel 1,000 miles in a day and increase divine power? If we had such a horse, we probably wouldn't have to build trains and high-speed trains back on Earth. This is Asgard's dueling training ground? It's so vast and spectacular, more than 5 times bigger than Earth's Olympic Stadium. No wonder it's called the Divine Realm. Kyle surprised an envious expression when he saw all the new things in God's domain, like a country bumpkin who had never seen the world, made Felder, the deputy general who was leading him around God's domain, very happy. There are even more magical and extraordinary things. Come, I'll take you to some other places. Felder hurriedly called out. His inner pride and vanity made him want nothing more than to take Kale on a tour of all the places in the divine realm so that he could broaden his horizons and admire Asgard's immortality and greatness from the bottom of his heart. After passing through the residential streets, the horse track, and the training grounds, Felder and Kale continued to venture deeper into the divine realm. Soon, they arrived in front of something that looked like a sacrificial temple. The path was paved with clean white bricks that led to the temple. There was not a speck of dust on it. Fire pans were placed on both sides of the path every 5 meters, the flames inside burning brightly. The ancient Greek-style temple was made of pure white bricks and hung sacred at the edge of a waterfall at the end of the ground. 2 tall guards wearing golden armor and holding long axes were standing guard in front of the temple gate, not moving at all. The voices of many Asgardian youths could be faintly heard from within the temple. From time to time, a faint milky white light would fly out from the temple's roof and disappear into the bright stars in the sky. Felder only led Kale past the temple's main entrance. Kale didn't care at first, but as if his body had sensed something, he suddenly stopped in front of the temple and looked at the ancient temple. "General Felder, what is this place?" Kale asked curiously. "This is Asgard's Hall of Valhalla." Felder looked at the temple with unwavering faith and explained in reverence, "This is also known as the Cradle of Dreams for divine generals and divine soldiers. It's a sacred temple that King Odin bestowed upon us with divine power." Martyr's Palace. Kale rubbed his chin, a glint in his eyes. He smiled at Ferd. "General Ferd, can I take a look inside the Martyr's Palace?" "Just one look, I want to feel the presence of the King of Pantheon up close." According to the rules, no one can enter the Martyr's Palace without the qualifications of a divine realm soldier. Field stuttered, a difficult look on his face. Even if he had entered the God's Domain military's horse track or training field, he wouldn't have hesitated in the slightest. Now, however, he hesitated for a full 5 seconds. In the end, under Kale's expectant gaze, Field gritted his teeth and agreed. "However, since you are His Highness Thor's honored guest and can step into the God realm, I will make an exception for you. Remember, just go in and take a look. Don't touch anything else." "Of course." Kyle smiled calmly and nodded in agreement. Since Field had made his decision, he no longer hesitated. He led Kale straight to the Martyr's Palace's entrance. Before they could cross the threshold, the golden guards in front of the door swung their axes. The crisp sound of metal clashing rang out as they stopped the two from entering the Martyr's Palace. "Move aside. I am Thor's deputy general, Field. I wish to enter the Martyr's Palace." Field displayed his identity card in a domineering manner. When the golden guards saw this, they quickly raised their axes and stood guard like stone statues once more. The Martyr's Palace flickered with fiery light, its gentle radiance illuminating the hall. Kale looked up slightly and saw the golden statue of Odin wielding the Spear of Eternity and riding an 8-legged Pegasus. There were other statues in the corners of the hall, all of them bent over and holding large balls. More than a dozen Asgardian youths, regardless of gender, dressed in plain white robes, were diligently and religiously worshipping the statue of Odin. Their faces were dignified and solemn as they tried to touch the balls in each corner. Even if the youths noticed Kale and Field's entrance, they didn't pay them any attention. They were immersed in the sacred ceremony of the shrine. Asgardian commoners will enter the Martyr's Palace when they turn 16 and become adults. This isn't just a necessary ceremony. It's also a process of inheriting divine power, Field explained softly. Kale just happened to see a girl reach out to touch one of the balls. Specks of bright light flickered, baptizing her body. Divine power appeared from nowhere and covered her body. These balls represent different divine powers. Thor's power, the fire god's power, the light god's power, and so on. Every Asgardian commoner can try to touch and sense them. Based on their affinity with different divine powers, they can receive the corresponding divine powers' baptism and protection. After hearing Field's explanation, Cale finally understood where the Asgardian soldiers' divine power came from. Every god was like a divine power source. When they were alive, they stored their divine power in the martyr's palace, waiting for others to sense and receive it. After circling half the hall of the martyr's palace, Cale was surprised to find an anomaly in a corner. The statues and inheritance balls were covered in black cloth. The cloth was covered in dust accumulated over the years, and it didn't fit in with the holiness of the surroundings. "Don't stop here." Field reached out to pull Cale and warned in a low voice, "That's the inheritance point of the death god's power. Commoners are forbidden from sensing it now." Death god. Cale fell into deep thought. He naturally understood the reason behind this. The goddess of death, Hela, was the elder sister of Thor who had been stripped of her divine status by Odin and banished to the undead world due to her excessive ambition. At this time, a blinding pillar of lightning lit up from Thor's inheritance point and enveloped the body of a youth. The pillar of light reached the ceiling of the martyr's palace and illuminated the hall. This scene caused the other youths to exclaim in admiration and envy. "TSK, TSK. Our Thor's army has another potential candidate to be groomed into a divine champion," Field exclaimed in admiration. Field sighed in admiration and explained, "Every Asgardian has a different affinity for divine power. Some can only guide the power of the thunder god to train their bodies, while others can borrow divine power for themselves." "General Field, it's definitely the latter," Cale said with a smile. "Of course." Field puffed out his chest proudly. "When I sensed Thor's power back then, I was able to trigger a pillar of divine power with a 2-meter radius. Even His Highness Thor was alarmed." Cale circled around and finally stopped in front of the sphere containing the fire god's power. He felt a strange feeling from the unseen world. This ball was resonating with the divine power in his body. Did the fire god, who was born in the universe a long time ago, leave something here? Cale wondered. Seeing his abnormality, Field walked up in surprise. "What's wrong?" "It's about time, we should go out." "General Field, can I sense this?" Cale pointed at the sphere in front of him and asked with a serious expression. "You?" Field froze for a moment before laughing out loud. "It's not that I don't want you to sense it, but you humans can't sense divine power at all. In other words, out of all the races in the universe, only us Asgardians, the loyal subjects of our god, can receive divine power's protection." "Then I'll try." Chapter 204. Divine Palace. Built in the center of Alaska, it represented the core of the universe, supreme power, and divine power. At the same time, it was the exclusive residence and meeting place of the god race. At this time, in the main hall of the sacred Golden Palace, an old man with white hair and beard sat on the throne of the King of Gods. His right eye was covered by a golden lens, and his only remaining eye was deep and bright, flashing with faint wisdom and majesty. He wore a full set of golden armor and held a golden scepter that represented supreme power. A red cloak was draped over his back, and his old body kept bobbing up and down, emitting a monstrous divine aura. Odin. The protagonist of Norse mythology, the king of the gods, the master of the 9 realms. At this time, Odin sat on the throne and looked down calmly at his 2 sons standing side by side in the hall. Thor, and Loki. One of them had a rough face and a strong body. He wore golden armor and held Thor's hammer. His eyes were full of vigor, and his aura was as domineering as thunder. He was undoubtedly a warrior among warriors. The other had a feminine face and a thin body. He wore a black robe and held the World Tree Staff. He had a wicked smile on his face, and his mysterious and evil aura was unfathomable. Thor. Why didn't you change into a clean set of clothes when you were disheveled when meeting father? Loki glanced at Saul intentionally or unintentionally and started to lecture him calmly. I came back from the ancient battlefield and rushed over as soon as I left the Bifrost. I believe father won't mind. Thor smiled and scratched his golden hair as he lowered his head and said to Odin. But. Loki wanted to say something more, but Odin coughed lightly and interrupted him. All right, you two brothers have been arguing since you were young. Now pay attention to the situation. Yes, father. Loki quickly bowed and saluted. Thor pouted and bowed as well. I called you two here to remind you. I will pass down the throne of Alaska in about 3 or 4 years. Odin looked at Thor and Loki with only one eye. He tapped the floor with his scepter as if he was knocking on the hearts of the two gods. He said in a deep voice, one of you will inherit the throne. 3 to 4 years was a very short time to the divine race. With a smile on his face, Thor made no attempt to hide his joy and impatience. He raised the hammer of Thor high up and said straightforwardly, Father, pass the throne to me. I swear that I will devote my life to Alaska and do my best to maintain the peace of the 9 realms. Loki's heart trembled, but his face was as calm as before. His eyes sank slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Odin took in the reactions of his 2 sons. After a moment of silence, he said in a deep voice, There's no rush. We'll see how you perform over the next few years. In the end, we'll choose a new king that won't be controversial. All right, I'll definitely prove myself on the battlefield. Thor said heartily. I won't let you down. Rocky bowed. That's right. Father, there's one thing that I hope you'll grant me. Thor wanted to take this opportunity to tell him about Kale, but at this moment, the Palace of Immortals trembled slightly. What's going on? Thor's and Rocky's expressions changed. Not only did the earthquake not stop, but it was getting bigger and bigger. Even the golden handicrafts and ornaments were clinking and rolling to the ground. Odin couldn't sit still and stood up from his seat. His one-eyed dignified gaze swept past Thor and Rocky, and looked at the scene outside the door of the main hall behind them. Thor and Rocky turned around together. When they saw the source of the shocking change, their hearts trembled. It was the same shock as when they heard that the throne was about to be passed on. Outside the door of the main hall, a flame with a radius of 10 meters rose from the bottom to the top like a totem pole. It was so vigorous that it went straight into the stars in the sky. The flame was golden with a hint of red, burning a large area of the sky bright red. Thousands of bright stars appeared dim at this moment. This sudden change caused all the creatures in Alaska to look at the flames that connected the sky and the earth in horror. In that instant, the flame illuminated the divine realm. That direction, is the Martyr's Palace? Rocky's mouth twitched as he said with wide eyes, Has there ever been such an exaggerated perception of divine power since the Martyr's Palace was built? As far as I know, there hasn't been. Thor shook his head. Who said there hasn't been? Odin retorted. He looked at the burning clouds in the sky and said thoughtfully, Back then, when Heimdall sensed divine power, there was a similar scene. Thor and Rocky looked at each other and said in surprise at the same time, Father, do you mean to say Alaska has another guardian of the realm of the gods? Rainbow Bridge, teleportation portal. Wielding his sword with both hands, Heimdall suddenly opened his eyes and looked forward. It was as if he could ignore spatial distance and directly see the scene inside the Martyr's Palace. How is this possible? How can it be him? Heimdall's eyes narrowed, shock appearing on his usually calm face for the first time. At the same time, inside the Martyr's Palace, Kale's right hand rested on the sphere. The pillar of flame that resonated with it expanded outward, enveloping Ferd, the dozen or so Alaskan youths, and even the entire temple. The real yet illusory flame soared into the sky and disappeared into the universe. There really is something. Kale softly muttered to himself. Not only was his constitution guiding the remnant divine power of the fire god, but he also didn't know which fire god had left something inside the sphere. That thing could only be taken out by another fire god. Perhaps it was a personal treasure trove that no one had noticed for countless years after the fire god's death. Now I've gotten lucky. Kale calmed his mind and used his divine power to resonate with the fire god. He used it as a key to open the treasure trove and slowly took out the item. Bits of fragmented memories gathered into a string, piecing together a complete message in his mind. Within Kale's card space, a card gradually materialized from nothingness. It shone with a dazzling purple light, standing out among the other cards. Sword of Eternity Forging Method, the forging method of the Sword of Eternity. Rare purple ability card. Materials required: World Tree Branch, Eternal Fire, Wuru Metal, Rubik's Cube Fragment, Crushed Stone Ingot, Heavenly God's Blood, etc. Must be forged in a superstellar furnace and possess the power of a cosmic planetary-grade divine weapon. It's not the real thing, but only the forging method of a divine weapon? The previous fire god should have at least left his divine weapon behind. Kale sighed inwardly. The materials needed to forge the sword were rare and precious. He didn't have most of them, and had never even heard of some of them. He could only slowly collect them in the future. After getting what he wanted, Kale withdrew his hand. Only then did the flame gradually fade away. The surface of his body still burned with a faint, transparent crimson divine flame. Dense divine power continued to leak out. With a crack, the sphere that allowed him to sense the fire god's divine power shattered, indicating that the divine power inside had been emptied. Chapter 205. Within the Martyr's Palace, it wasn't just Ferd. The other Asgardian youths and Golden Guards all looked like they'd seen a ghost as they stared dumbstruck at the blazing Kale. The torrential fire god's power seemed to be possessed as it clung to Kale's body in a frenzy. Strands of divine brilliance flowed from his every movement. He stood calmly within the Martyr's Palace, his golden eyes sparkling brightly. He really did look like a true god. Me? Didn't I say earlier that I'm just a human from Earth? But I'm the first human to set foot in outer space and the divine realm. Facing Field's question, Kale shrugged and said in a serious tone. How is that possible? How can you be just a human? How can a mere human sense it? Ferd's heart seemed to have suffered a heavy blow as he forced a smile in a daze. Suddenly, he seemed to have thought of something as he turned his gaze back to the broken sphere in the statue's hands. Oh no! Ferd's face was deathly pale as he said in a panic, it's one thing for someone not from the divine realm to touch the fire god's inheritance, but you even broke it. This fire god's power just loves to pounce on me. There's nothing I can do about it. Kale sighed heavily and patted Ferd's shoulder, saying meaningfully, also, General Ferd. General Ferd, I had to get your permission before I touched the inheritance point. I didn't know something like this would happen. Ferd wanted to cry, but no tears came out. His expression was extremely ugly. No matter what, he had to shoulder at least half of the blame. Kale stroked his chin and suggested, how about I return the divine power now? The fire god's inheritance sphere is broken. How are you going to return it? Ferd glared at him. Kale continued, why don't we hurry up and leave? The people outside the Martyr's Palace might not have noticed the situation here. Didn't you notice just now? How could the people outside the palace not have noticed the fiery light? Maybe even His Highness has already. Before Field could finish his words, the sound of galloping horses came from outside the hall. Along with the clanking sound of armor, a loud voice penetrated the distance and rang in their ears. Pass on His Majesty's order. I invite the person who triggered the fiery miracle to come to the main hall of the Immortal Palace immediately. No delay. What should we do now, General Ferd? After the messenger left, Kale turned to Felder and seriously asked for his opinion. What else can we do? Enter the immortal palace and meet His Majesty Odin. Worst comes to worst, I'll be a man again in 80 years. Field looked as if he had nothing left to live for and shrugged. 10 minutes later, in the hall of the immortal palace. Kale and Field stood side by side in the middle of the hall. Thor and Loki, who were a little ahead of them, looked sideways at Kale. Thor had a strange look on his face. Loki frowned slightly. Odin, who was sitting on the throne, remained silent. He looked at Kale carefully with his majestic and deep eye. No one knew what he was thinking. Kale, who was burning with uncontrollable flames, became the focus of all the gods. For a moment, the majestic golden palace fell into a strange silence. How could he rely on his status as a lieutenant in the divine realm? The proud Field didn't even dare to breathe loudly. He lowered his head like a child who had done something wrong. Cold sweat soaked the lining of his armor. Care took advantage of this opportunity to look at the gods in the hall with his head held high and his chest puffed out without any fear. Thor didn't need to be mentioned. He had seen him before. The one next to him should be his troublemaking second brother, Loki. It was basically the same as seen in the movies. However, Kale looked at him from a close distance. That faintly discernible evil smile and the sinister expression that seemed to be brewing a belly full of evil tricks made him have an inexplicable impulse to baptize and barbecue him with flames. Looking ahead, the one sitting on the golden throne was the king of gods, Odin. After a brief look, Kale's heart trembled. He had the illusion that he was facing an invincible god of war with a human body. He subconsciously looked away. This was Odin. Although he wasn't close enough to peek at his ability card, Kale was still very sure that the one in front of him was the king of gods of Asgard, the universe supreme master he had met now, a true god creature at the top of the universe's power level. He had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, ruled the 9 worlds, established the divine realm, released the rainbow bridge with his own godly weapon, and could bestow godly power and spells to others. He was omnipotent. If Thor was only a slightly more powerful alien, then Odin could be considered a true god. Does anyone want to come out and explain? Odin said calmly, breaking the silence in the main hall. Field fell to his knees with a thud. Your Majesty, it's my fault. I shouldn't have brought this human into the martyr's palace without permission. That's why this happened. Humph. Loki snorted coldly. His voice was calm, but there was a hidden murderous intent. Lieutenant Field, not only did he enter the martyr's palace, but he also violated the divine realm's laws from the moment he set foot in the divine realm. Now he's even more guilty. How can you bear the consequences with your status? Field's face was drained of blood. He could only kowtow to admit his guilt. That's enough. Thor took a deep breath, walked out, and stood in front of Field. He knelt on one knee and reported to Odin, Father, it was I who brought Field here. I was the one who brought Kyle into the divine realm. I was also the one who ordered Field to show Kyle around. If all of this is considered a mistake, then I will take full responsibility. You'll take responsibility? You really know how to cause trouble. I've only just told you about the throne, and you expect me to pass it to you with peace of mind? Odin's words were laced with anger. Thor gritted his teeth and bowed silently. Loki saw all of this. The corners of his lips curled into an evil smile, but it quickly disappeared. Odin stared straight at Kale and asked in a dignified voice, You're Kale, right? Yes, Your Majesty. Kale bowed slightly to show his respect. He didn't kneel. I'll give you a choice. Odin raised his voice, his powerful words echoing throughout the hall. From now on, join the divine realm and become its guardian. You'll stay here and watch over the martyr's palace. You'll have the same authority as Heimdall and only one level below me. You'll be on the same level as Thor and Loki. Father? Loki's expression changed. He was about to say something when Odin raised a hand to stop him. Thor and Field raised their heads to look at Kale, full of anticipation for his reply. Join the divine realm. Countless beings in the universe dreamed of it. Most people wouldn't refuse. Unfortunately, Kale was no ordinary person. Chapter 206. Forgive me for refusing. His voice was not loud, but it was just loud enough to echo in the quiet main hall of the immortal palace. Everyone who heard this answer, except for the shrewd Odin, changed their expressions at the same time. He actually refused? Loki opened his mouth in shock. He looked at the expressionless Kale and wanted to ask him loudly, "Do you know what you just refused?" The guardian of the divine realm. He could be considered a god in one step. Apart from the high and mighty Odin, even princes like them couldn't give orders to the guardian. It could be said that to some extent, it was an honorary position on par with the royal family of the gods. Moreover, the guardian wasn't the Rainbow Bridge, which was the entrance to the divine realm, but the martyr's palace in the depths of the divine realm. It was the most leisurely and stable job. Thor and Field lowered their heads even more. At this time, Kale's refusal of Odin's suggestion might be the fuse that caused a major change. Odin's anger would shake the entire 9 realms. Otherwise, how could the Divine King conquer the vast 9 realms if he didn't have the slightest temper and fighting spirit? Of course, after Odin intended to abdicate due to his many hidden injuries, his temper had become much more restrained. He was more like a gentle old man in his twilight years. Odin's scepter knocked on the floor. Thor saw that something was wrong and hurriedly pleaded for Kale. "Father, Kale has always wanted to return to Earth. I said there was one more thing to do before. It was to open the Rainbow Bridge and send him back." Odin was silent. He looked at Kale majestically, as if waiting for his reply. Kale's face was expressionless. He said sincerely, "I left Earth and have been in outer space for a long time. I've long wanted to go back. The divine realm is good, but in my heart, it can't compare to my hometown." This was naturally his heartfelt words, but he put them in a much more tactful way. In reality, Kale didn't care about the guardian of the divine realm at all. Let him stay in the divine realm and guard the martyr's palace. He was thinking too much. There was no reason for him to become a guard for the divine territory instead of being a hero on Earth. Odin didn't take out anything that was enough to move him. It was impossible for him to trick him with empty promises and threaten him. "Father, in my opinion, why don't we lock him up with the heavenly lock and use him as the fire god's inheritance point?" Rocky suggested slowly. "How vicious. Do you have a grudge against me?" Kale glanced at Loki and secretly made a note in his little notebook. He would settle it slowly in the future. "Father, Kale is not from our world, and the matter of the fire god's power was purely an accident. Just let him go back to Earth," Thor pleaded. Odin remained silent, his gaze fixed on Kale. Kale's body tensed up slightly, and he sighed in his heart. Fortunately, the previous fire god's power was attached to the surface of his body, concealing his own internal power. If Odin knew that Kale was a god, it would be another difficult situation to deal with. After all, the Asgard divine clan was hostile to most of the other divine clans. "You can go back to Earth." The first half of Odin's sentence didn't let Kale relax, but the second half followed. "But you still have to accept the position of guardian of the divine realm. Otherwise, I can't let you leave the divine realm." "What do you mean?" Kale asked seriously. "You can get some of the rights of a guardian of the divine realm, such as using the Rainbow Bridge to travel to and from the divine realm or entering the immortal palace. The obligation you have to pay is that when Asgard encounters foreign enemies and disasters, you will need to lend a helping hand as a guardian of the divine realm." After Odin finished speaking, not only was Kale stunned, but Thor and Loki also had expressions of disbelief. The rules of this position were too lax, or rather, the conditions given were too benevolent. At this moment, Thor and Loki both doubted in their hearts whether or not they were really their biological children. At this age, she had never seen her imperial father take a step back and compromise on his own accord. Just for a human from Earth. It's that simple? Kale asked in surprise, looking suspiciously at Odin. This old man who had lived for God knows how many eras, could he be scheming something? It's that simple. Odin nodded. Then I'll agree to the position of guardian of the divine realm for the time being. Kyle nodded. This condition was unexpectedly easy. That's good, Lieutenant Field. Odin changed the topic. Field immediately shivered and said loudly, "Here. Take Kale to the divine realm's treasury and let him pick anything to take away as a token of the guardian." Odin said in a low voice. "No problem." Field stood up happily as if he had received a reward. He pulled Kale's hand and quickly left the cold and majestic golden hall. After the two left, Thor stood up. He and Loki were in a daze as they looked up at Odin on the throne in confusion. "Do you two know Earth?" Odin asked calmly. "We do. Father went to Earth to fight and expel the frost giants. It's located in the human world, at the edge of the Milky Way, in the wilderness." Thor and Loki each gave an answer. It's said that the divine realm is the head of the 9 realms, above all other realms. But in fact, the most powerful realm in the 9 realms is the human world. Odin paused. His one eye showed a complicated expression. And the human world is said to be centered around the Milky Way alliance. But secretly, Earth is the new star with endless potential and rapid development. Thor and Loki heard this and still didn't agree. Sometimes, deep-rooted ideas for hundreds of thousands of years couldn't be completely changed with a few simple words. Father chose to let him go just because he's an Earthling? Loki asked incredulously. Of course it's not that simple. Odin shook his head. Looking at his 2 beloved sons, he said inexplicably, "You'll know in the future. I'm not letting him go. I'm building a connection between him and the divine realm." Kale, I haven't heard this name for a long time, in the basement of the Immortal Palace, Odin's treasury. In the passage leading to the treasury, the faint and cold light-colored floor was laid. Some blue flames flickered on both sides. The tall guards were silent like statues. "Little brother Kale." "No, now you should be called Guardian Kale." Field smiled. While leading the way, he said enthusiastically to Kale, "You must take care of little brother in the future." "Little brother?" Kale glanced at his rough and familiar face and his thick black beard. He sighed and said, "You're my older brother. This can't be changed." "Ha ha ha, you're too polite." Field laughed and said emotionally, "His Majesty might be in a good mood today. He actually agreed to let you be a guardian, rewarded you with treasures, and allowed you to return to your home planet. It's quite abnormal." Kale shrugged. He also felt a little surprised in his heart. Logically speaking, no matter how you look at it, this matter shouldn't be resolved so easily. Could it be that Odin read the script? Chapter 207. At the end of the underground passage was a huge door. The door was almost 10 meters tall and went straight to the ceiling. It was so tightly shut that there was not a single gap. The main door was carved with Odin in armor, riding a divine horse, holding the eternal spear, and conquering the 9 worlds. The golden guards on both sides of the door were 2 meters tall. They held long axes and guarded the door like mighty stone statues. With Odin's verbal command, Field led Kyle to the door without any hindrance. Kale. Next, you will face the most precious and abundant treasury in the entire universe. Every item inside is a treasure of the star field, or even a top weapon of the 9 worlds. Field reminded him verbally. His eyes were filled with envy. Even he, who had worked so hard to settle the disputes of the 9 worlds, didn't have the right to set foot in Odin's treasury. As far as he knew, only 3 people had entered Odin's treasury and taken one of the items inside. Thor took Thor's hammer. Loki couldn't take Thor's hammer, so he chose the World Tree Staff. The last person was Heimdall, the Guardian, who obtained the Rainbow Bridge sword. Remember, His Majesty Odin asked you to choose one item. You can only take one item inside. If you are greedy and take too many, even I will be implicated. Field's tone was unprecedentedly serious. I understand. Kale nodded. His eyes were shining. He also had a faint sense of anticipation in his heart. Odin's treasury. It was nothing more than the items Odin had collected and stored over the years when he conquered the 9 worlds. The items inside were not divine weapons. Even Odin couldn't afford to lose face. Under the strenuous push of the guard, the huge door of the treasury slowly opened inwards. It only opened a passage that allowed one person to pass through. Kale did not hesitate and stepped in. It was pitch black without any light source. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. As if sensing the presence of someone, the blue flames hanging on the walls and ceiling lit up, revealing a path that led deeper into the hall. At the side of the treasury hall, there was a golden platform that glowed faintly every 5 meters. On top of each platform was a treasure that had been sealed for countless years, quietly waiting for a fated person to take it away. Let me see what these things are. Kale took a deep breath, rubbed his palms, licked his dry lips, and quickly approached the first treasure. It was a crystal ball with its own light source. It was sparkling and translucent like a luminous pearl, giving off a mysterious aura. Compared to Earth, Kale was already a well-informed all-round hero, not to mention the artificial intelligence vice. It had the database of items from Planet Soccer. However, looking at the crystal ball in front of him, he still couldn't identify what it was. It seems to be tainted with the aura of magic. Kale said to himself as he focused his mind on the crystal ball. An item card quickly appeared. Agamotto Crystal Ball, a treasure passed down by the sorcerers. Gold item card. It has the power of all-seeing. It can cross multiple dimensions and world boundaries to detect the source of magic and energy. It requires magic to activate. As long as there is a trace of the corresponding energy, it can detect the coordinates of the existence of the creature. When used to the extreme, it can detect dangerous events from the future. As expected. Kale touched his chin and whispered, Odin must be related to the ancient sorcerers on Earth. Otherwise, why would he have this thing? However, this was a purely auxiliary magic tool. Kale directly skipped over it and walked to the second item. It was a compact eyeball-shaped accessory. It was even scarier than the crystal ball. As he walked closer, the golden pupil seemed to be staring at him. Warlock's Eye, a treasure passed down by the sorcerers. Gold item card. The Warlock's Eye is a top-notch magic tool worn on the chest. When used with magic, a golden eye will appear on the forehead. It can see through everything and trace back to the origin of the universe. When used to the extreme, it can emit a dazzling light, dissipating the dark fog and illusions in the dark dimension. It is especially effective against dark creatures in multiple dimensions. Kale was speechless. 1 or 2 items, why are all the things in Odin's treasure trove from Earth? Odin, this old guy, don't tell me that he specializes in stealing treasures from Earth's ancient era? Kale quickly walked to the third treasure. It was a black box emitting cold air. When he was 3 meters away, even his skin felt cold. Chest of Ice, divine weapon of the frost giants. Gold item card. It contains endless cold air. When used, it can instantly turn an area into a frozen land. When used to the extreme, it can turn a life planet into an eternal ice age. Kale frowned and took a step back in discomfort. The divine power in his body was restless. He had the instinct to release torrential divine flames to resist the cold air of the icebox. The frost giants and the fire gods were mortal enemies. Kale suddenly realized this and retreated from the icebox. Next, he checked the treasures stored in the treasure trove. There were treasures from the higher-level creatures of the 9 worlds. There were low-level divine tools made by the branches of the world and the Wuru. They were all divine items that were at least gold rank. Among them, 2 items made Kale stop for a long time. Life card, a monument of life and time. Gold item card. A monument left behind by the distant civilization of Atlantis. The words engraved on it were very mysterious. It recorded the evolution of living things. Any living thing could evolve to the highest level. It might have come from an unknown universe. Unfortunately, no matter how many times Vice analyzed it with the system program, he still could not decipher the mysterious words. Kale could only give up temporarily, but he also kept an eye on it. There was another item, the Infinity Glove. Yes, it was the Infinity Glove. However, it was a counterfeit of the Infinity Glove counterfeit, a counterfeit of the legendary glove that can control 6 cosmic stones. Gold item card. It can only store 1 cosmic stone. After a short period of use, the glove will gradually break and be destroyed. In an instant, it can perfectly release the energy of a single cosmic stone. Even if it was just a counterfeit of the Infinity Glove, it was still not to be underestimated. If Kale still had the dimensional stone, he would probably choose the counterfeit of the Infinity Glove without hesitation. It could be used as an ultimate amulet, a trump card. What a pity. Kale looked at the Infinity Glove with nostalgia. He turned and walked to the end of the treasure trove. There was one last treasure that had not been checked yet. A golden fire plate was placed on the display table. It seemed to be burning with an ordinary flame. The light of the flame shone on his face slightly. This is... Kale's heart skipped a beat. He felt that his divine power was unnaturally attracted and affected by the flame in the fire plate. Eternal Fire, a divine tool of the flame giants. Gold item card. It was neither created by God nor by man. The past, present, and future were always a ball of eternal living fire. It burned according to a certain scale and extinguished according to a certain scale. Chapter 208. In the main hall of the Palace of Immortals. Your Majesty. Guardian Kale has already chosen a divine artifact in the treasury. Now Prince Thor is taking him to the Rainbow Bridge. Field respectfully knelt on one knee and reported to Odin on the throne. What did he choose? Odin squinted his one eye and asked in a low voice. The Eternal Fire. He took the Eternal Fire. Field answered carefully. What? That human dared to choose the Eternal Fire and take it out of the realm of the gods. Before Odin could say anything, Loki, who was still serving in the main hall, was shocked. He breathed quickly and said, Father, the Eternal Fire is, I know. Odin shook his head slightly and said in a low voice, I said, he can choose anything in the treasury and take it away. Since he chose the Eternal Fire, then so be it. Yes. Loki lowered his head and looked unwilling. The Eternal Fire was related to the future of the realm of the gods. It was important to trigger the twilight of the gods. Yet, it was given to an outsider. At the same time, at the Rainbow Bridge of the realm of the gods. Pa! Thor held Thor's hammer in one hand and Kale's arm in the other. The two flew out of the palace of the gods and landed at the end of the Rainbow Bridge. Kyle was still hugging the golden fire plate. There was no fuel in the plate, and the flames were burning fiercely within it, flickering without extinguishing. Kale, I'll leave you here. There are still some small disputes at the edge of the 9 realms that I need to deal with. Thor looked at Kale sincerely. His eyes fell on the Eternal Fire in his hand and said, I didn't expect that you would become the second guardian of the realm of the gods in the blink of an eye. I didn't expect it either. Kale shrugged and smiled. You must miss your home. I won't delay your trip. My father often mentions the name Earth. Thor smiled and scratched his head. If I have the chance in the future, I will go to Earth. No problem. When the time comes, I'll definitely receive you well. Now that you know how good Earth is, maybe you won't want to return to the Divine Dominion anymore, Kale teased and turned to walk into the Rainbow Palace. He waved his hand behind him and said, "Goodbye." "Goodbye." Thor's loud voice rang out from behind him. Kale didn't turn back as he walked straight into the Rainbow Palace. Heimdall, who had been guarding this place, stood high up on the platform. He opened his eyes and looked down at him. Heimdall. Now, I should be qualified to use the Bifrost. Kale and Heimdall looked at each other and said calmly and indifferently. Heimdall nodded. Compared to before, his attitude was much more relaxed. He replied calmly and forcefully, "Naturally, we are both guardians. You have the right to use the Rainbow Bridge to go to any known peaceful place in the 9 realms." He paused for a moment before continuing, "If you want to enter the divine territory from the outside, just shout my name. My eyes can see anywhere in the 9 realms. As long as I see you, I can use the Rainbow Bridge to pick you up." "Okay, I'm going back to Earth now. Right now, right now." Kyle snapped his fingers, his body and mind quietly becoming excited and joyful. "Take a few steps forward." Under Heimdall's instructions, Kale walked to the inner part of the palace. The device at the Rainbow Palace's port was aimed at his body. "Target Earth. I'm going to activate the Rainbow Bridge," Heimdall said as he walked to the highest point of the central platform. He held the Rainbow Bridge sword with both hands and raised it. He aimed the sword at the key-like socket and suddenly inserted it. Bzzzt. White electric light was transmitted from the Rainbow Bridge to the surrounding outer walls. The Rainbow Palace spun quickly. The port condensed and spewed out colorful light. It instantly covered Kale, who was holding the fire plate. From the outside, one could see that the Rainbow Palace was also at the edge of the waterfall cliff. The tank-like cannon on the outside adjusted its angle and shot out a dazzling rainbow light beam. It instantly pierced through the divine territory and crossed the 9 realms. Kale shuttled through the Rainbow Bridge. The scene in the star field in his vision was chaotic. The bright stars blurred and retreated. The ambiguous feeling of crossing the universe disappeared. After leaving the divine territory, Kale's body followed the rainbow light beam and landed on a barren land. "Earth, I, Kale, am back." Before he could check his location, even a cold-tempered person like Kale couldn't help but clench his fists and shout at the sky. But even he couldn't hear the voice that came out of his mouth. Soon, he keenly noticed that something was wrong with the surrounding environment. The grayish-white ground where not even an inch of grass grew was full of potholes and circular dents. There was no trace of life in the vast area in his vision. When he looked up, he saw the boundless starry sky. Most importantly, there was no air, no sound, vacuum. Realizing this, Kale frowned slightly. He first drew the eternal fire in his hand into a card and then summoned Venom. Symbiosis formed a full-body combat suit. Vice transformed into a headset and was also wrapped in Venom's coat. This time, its voice finally entered his ears clearly. "Master. The soil here is rich in elements such as silicon, aluminum, potassium, barium, hafnium, and rare earth elements. There is no water source, atmosphere, food supply, etc. The preliminary judgment is that the environment is not suitable for human beings to live in. It is ruled out as the Earth's area. Of course, I know this is not the Earth. What the hell is Heimdall doing? Did he get this place wrong?" Kale's face was slightly cold as he looked around at the barren scene. The vacuum couldn't transmit sound, so there was no way to call Heimdall to take him back to the divine territory. On the silver-white ground where he stood, the runed circle of the rainbow bridge was imprinted on it, and there were sparks emitting green smoke. Kale tried to take a step. His body was light as a feather, and he could directly jump up a few meters with the smallest unit of control. But the highly evolved divine body quickly adapted to the harsh environment in a short time. He ran across a few kilometers at top speed, and all he passed was monotonous and desolate land. There were many pits, and he could see some residual detection equipment on the bare surface. "If I'm not wrong, this should be," Kale murmured and went around to the other side of the planet. When he saw the familiar blue planet in the dark starry sky in front of him, he finally showed a relieved smile. Sure enough, this was the moon. Heimdall did send him to the wrong place, but the error was not so big that it was unacceptable. At least, he did not send him to other realms. If he was sent to the undead world and had a chance to return to the divine territory, Kale would definitely pin the eternal fire on Heimdall's head. Kale sighed and began to wander around the barren land of the moon. No matter how he imagined it, he could never imagine that one day he would be able to walk alone on the moon without any assistance. There were no signs of life on every inch of the moon, and the surface was full of holes caused by meteorites of various sizes. There were also many irregular scars that seemed to be left behind by other energy sources. After receiving the guidance from the Vice, Kale walked about 2 kilometers in a direction and found a spaceship from Earth parked on the moon. Kale was a little surprised. He carefully observed the appearance of the spaceship in front of him, which was extremely technologically advanced. It was 8 meters tall and had a radius of about 15 meters. The outer shell was specially painted with a silver-white texture. It was supported by a high-pressure mechanical quadrupod that stretched out to support the weight of the spaceship. It looked like a huge metal monster crawling on the ground. There was an image of the American flag on the spaceship. This was obviously not the aviation technology that should have existed at the time he left. When Kale left Earth, it was 1945, not long after World War II. At that time, the concept of aviation technology had just begun. No matter how advanced Earth's technology was, it still needed time to accumulate. How many years have passed on Earth? Kale was silent. Back then, he was most worried about going to outer space to seek treatment for his genetic disease, but when he returned, everything had changed. But no matter what, he still fulfilled the promise he made all those years ago, and returned safely as promised. Vice said considerately, "Master, do you want to forcefully hack into the operating system of this American spaceship? It can barely replace the damaged fighter jet and be your ride back to your hometown. Do I look like that kind of person who would just randomly steal other people's things?" Kale coughed, and his heart was slightly moved. He said seriously, "Can you directly hack into the system of this spaceship? How confident are you?" Vice quickly gave a conclusion. "Since we have not come into contact with the current level of technology, mechanical structures, and information communication on Earth, we can make a preliminary judgment based on the current known database. If we try to forcefully hack into the spaceship's system and use remote control, there is an 89% chance of success. There is a 9% chance of being affected by the spaceship's remote system detection. There is also a 2% chance of failure and exposing your location. Then forget it, the situation on Earth is not clear yet. If we are discovered, then," Kale and Vice were discussing the topic of snatching or not while facing the spaceship not far away. In the next moment, the door under the spaceship suddenly opened, and a male Caucasian wearing a bloated spacesuit walked down with a detection instrument in his hand. He wanted to carry out the collection and detection operations as usual. Oh my God! When the astronaut looked up and saw Kale standing on the ground in front of him, he was suddenly stunned, showing a horrified expression as if he had seen a ghost. "Since I've been discovered, then there's no other way." Kale smiled faintly, and suddenly stomped on the ground. He rushed to the astronaut at a very fast speed and knocked the other party to the ground. Venom consciously derived a black liquid, which turned into a hand that wrapped around the astronaut's body and violently threw him into the cabin like a cargo. At the same time, Vice transformed into a mechanical creature, broke away from Venom's coat, jumped and climbed into the spaceship, and took control of the spaceship from the inside. Chapter 209. 2008. This year, Ellis's votes crushed the rest of the candidates and he became the new president of the United States. This year, Stark Industries' thermal weapons industry spread all over the world. The United States expressed its willingness to support it as the #1 enterprise and to engage in in-depth cooperation. This year, Bana, a biology professor at Culver University in the United States, mysteriously disappeared in a radiation leak in his laboratory several years ago. No one had found his whereabouts until now. Only half of the year had passed, which was the beginning of June. Recently, 2 major events had happened that caused a frenzy on the internet and in the news media. The first event. The chairman of Stark Industries, the world's largest arms dealer, a playboy, and a top genius, Tony Stark, demonstrated a bomb specially produced for the United States military outside the military wilderness. On the way back with the military, he was attacked by terrorists, and all the United States soldiers along with him were shot and slaughtered. Tony's body was not found, and it was currently determined that his whereabouts were unknown. Some people were obsessed with Tony's talent and wealth, but more people couldn't help but be jealous and envious. But no matter what, he was a genius engineer who had changed most of the technological landscape of the 21st century. He was a rare talent on Earth. Although he was arrogant, flirtatious, and had many black marks, people still paid enough attention to him. The United States military, on the other hand, was frantically searching for him all over the world. The original newspapers reported the details and analysis of Tony's disappearance day and night until the second event appeared yesterday. The second event. The American spaceship Apollo 8 didn't stay on the moon for a week as scheduled. It didn't make any contact with the Underground Aviation Administration. It switched to autopilot mode and made an emergency return late last night. The Underground Aviation Administration couldn't contact the spaceship. It wasn't until early in the morning that the spaceship was located in the mountains and wilderness of North America. At that time, the spaceship had successfully landed, and the astronaut inside was in a coma and seriously injured state. After research, it was found that there were no signs of intrusion in the spaceship, and the black box surveillance was destroyed by some kind of magnetic interference. Later, after the astronaut recovered, he was detained in the interrogation room by many departments. After a week of interrogation, they still couldn't get any relevant information. The astronaut's mind was normal, and his body was healthy, but he repeatedly replied, "I saw a black angel on the moon. Trust me. I was knocked out by the black angel." The mysterious incident of the space dark angel remained unsolved even after thousands of years. It became the world's biggest unsolved mystery and was classified as the country's highest level of archives. Of course, this was all in the future. At this moment, in the remote mountains and wastelands of North America, 10 kilometers away from where the space capsule was forced to land. Boom! Boom! The engine roared, and an old off-road jeep quickly drove through the desert wilderness, raising billowing waves of dust. Inside the car, a mechanical music box that looked like a robot was standing upright on the driver's seat. The speakers were blasting out cool and refreshing electronic music. The rhythm of every note was vibrating at the climax. In the driver's seat sat a young man wearing a hooded jacket and jeans. He was controlling the steering wheel with one hand, and the other hand was leaning outside the window. The strong wind outside blew his bright silver hair up and brushed his forehead. "Vice, what song are you playing?" The silver-haired young man snorted in dissatisfaction. The deafening electronic music in the car stopped abruptly. Then, a gentle male voice came from the speakers. "Master, this is the most popular song in America this year. Are you indirectly describing me as an antique?" Cale frowned. After Weiss hacked into the space capsule's database, he knew the basic situation of the current era on Earth. He didn't expect that after going through 2 large spacetime wormholes and going out into space for less than a month, Earth was already in the 21st century. The year 2008 was more than half a century away from 1945. To be precise, it had been 63 years. 63 years. To a human, this could very well be a lifetime. Master, you have to admit that if you measure it in terms of Earth's time, there's no doubt that you're almost 90 years old, Weiss calmly told him the cruel truth. So be it, Kale shrugged nonchalantly, narrowed his eyes and said, Weiss. Earth's communication method in the 21st century, if it hasn't changed. It's definitely based on wireless communication in the form of electromagnetic waves, radio waves. Try connecting to the local server to go online and get information on the internet. Can you do that? Weiss' transformed robot opened and closed its speakers as if it was smiling. Of course, I'm the ancestor when it comes to communication signals. That's true. Kale smiled too. Weiss' original body was modified from the first mobile phone on Earth. It was a true ancestor. All right then, check all the information about Family Cal in the years that I've been away. It was rare for Kale to be so serious. Weiss didn't dare to be negligent and immediately used its system signal source in the form of radio waves. The radio waves were like lines that couldn't be seen clearly. They weaved into a light net and spread out to the surrounding area of several kilometers or even tens of kilometers. It captured passing electromagnetic information and traced it back to the local network server host. System connection activated. Local signal is weak. Successfully changed to satellite signal. Current connection status is good. After successfully connecting to Earth's network, Weiss was equivalent to a search engine that came with the Internet. At the very least, as long as it was on the Internet of the information age, it could read all the information that had been spread. After a while, Weiss replied, all the information related to Family Cal has never appeared on Earth's network. That's good. After Kale heard that, the corner of his mouth curled up and revealed a smile. It's good that they didn't expose themselves. They worked so hard to prepare for so long. If they don't know how to hide themselves and operate as a secret force, then they'll be letting me down. Is there any other important information about the new era that needs to be told to you now? Weiss asked. No need. Kale refused and said emotionally, let me experience and adapt to this era myself. Then where should we go now? Find Family Cal's hidden base overseas, Master. Weiss continued to ask. Let's go to the Stark Industries building in New York and see if the portal there still exists. Kale touched his chin and said thoughtfully. At that moment, a black dot slowly appeared in the sky in front of the Jeep's windshield. It was emitting thick smoke and was getting closer and closer to the ground. Kale looked up sharply and turned the steering wheel. He reacted quickly and slammed on the brakes. The Jeep drifted horizontally on the sand and stopped with a beautiful drift. Chapter 210. Ka. The windshield wipers of the Jeep began to move, clearing the parts and sand that had fallen on the windshield. A man's painful groan came from where the humanoid aircraft had fallen. Kale didn't hesitate. He looked at the vice on the driver's seat and reached out his hand. The vice understood what he meant. Its mechanical body quickly shrank and folded into an ordinary pair of sunglasses. Kale put on the sunglasses and walked out of the car. His eyes fell on the small sandpit in front of him. He saw a broken steel machine lying in the pit. The steel casing had fallen off, revealing a pair of gloved hands that surrounded his body. The broken steel parts on the outside were scattered all over the ground. There were wires, and some of them were still emitting sparks and black smoke. Phew! The man gasped in pain. He took off the steel helmet and mask on his head, revealing a mature gentleman's face. He had dry black hair and a small mustache. He was about 30 years old. His face was full of fatigue. His casual long sleeves were stained with blood and smoke. His chest was heaving up and down as he panted. His left hand seemed to be fractured and was held by the other hand. The man seemed to have just experienced a fierce battle and escaped to this place. When he saw the jeep parked in front of him and Kyle getting out of the car, he hurriedly called out for help. "Help me. Please take me away from here. What's in it for me if I save you?" Kyle looked down at the gentleman lying on the ground with cold arrogance and said seriously. Tawny paused and said without thinking, "I have money. Take me away and I'll give you money. Okay, the fare is $100 billion. I promise it's fast and safe." Kale snapped his fingers. 100 billion? Thor's mouth was wide open. Even a billionaire like him was shocked by this sky-high price. Isn't he taking advantage of the situation? Even robbing a bank wouldn't be so ridiculous. You don't want to? Then forget it. Kyle shrugged and decisively turned back to the driver's seat of the Jeep. He didn't forget to whisper, "I'm used to honking while driving. I don't know if I'll attract anyone over here later." Hey, don't. Thor had obviously suffered enough at the hands of the terrorists. He was so scared that he quickly struggled to get up from the ground. With a pale face, he pursed his dry lips and said, 100 billion it is, let me get in the car. After a while, the Jeep slowly started, leaving a broken and abandoned Iron Man armor parts on the ground. Tawny sat in the front passenger seat and looked out the window at the desert area that was getting further and further away. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief and lie down on the soft leather seat. "By the way, remember to write an IOU for me in the car." Kale's cold voice sounded. When Tawny heard this, it was as if he had been provoked and humiliated. He stood up in anger and scolded, "You bastard, you did it on purpose, didn't you? You definitely know who I am." "You? Who are you?" Kale asked expressionlessly as he pushed up his sunglasses. "I'm Tawny Stark." Tawny gritted his teeth and said, 100 billion I said I will give you, I will definitely give you, I have never written an IOU in my life. You don't want to write an IOU, right? Then I'll turn around and go back. Kale shrugged. "I don't believe it." Tawny was only halfway through his words when the Jeep really turned around and accelerated in the opposite direction. "Bastard, are you serious?" All right, okay." 3 seconds later, Tawny's scalp was numb and he completely admitted defeat. He picked up the pen and paper on the dashboard and buried his head in writing with one hand. In this half of his life, except for his father, no one can control his bad temper. But now, encountering a silver-haired young man who seems to be a dozen years younger than him, he is being played with in the palm of his hand. Kale laughed as he watched. Vice, who was in the form of sunglasses, flashed a green-like icon on the inside, and Venom, who was disguised as a coat, also made a strange laugh in his mind. In fact, in front of the Jeep, Kale, Vice, and Venom, the three basically recognized Tawny's identity at the same time. Needless to say, Tawny was the son of the old gentleman Howard, not to mention that he had the knowledge of a transmigrator, so how could he not recognize the future Iron Man Tawny? Vice, connected to the Earth's network, there was so much information about Tawny on the internet that it was difficult to ignore, and the existence of its body had a great relationship with the Stark family. Venom, on the other hand, relied on his extraordinary biological perception. According to him, this kid is exactly the same as Howard, weak. In a situation where the three coincided, Kale naturally took care of his big nephew. After all, they were family. Tawny sat in the car sullenly. He just lost a close friend who helped him make the first-generation Iron Man armor, and after a battle with terrorists, he was unlucky enough to meet a guy who cheated him of his money. "Look at this crappy car, and it costs 100 billion?" Tawny glanced at the interior of the car and suddenly froze. He touched it carefully with his hand and said in surprise, "Is this a 1945 limited edition Jeep? It looks brand new." "It's just a high imitation." Cale smiled indifferently. Tawny stopped talking and looked at Cale again. He was a genius engineer and also liked to collect famous cars. How could he not be able to distinguish the authenticity of the car? More importantly, there were only 3 limited edition Jeeps in the world, and one of them had been sealed in his father's old garage for a long time. Looking at the silver-haired young man in front of him, Tawny actually thought of his father, and his expression suddenly became gloomy. He hesitated and asked, "Who are you? Why are you in such a place?" "Me?" Cale thought for a while and said indifferently, "Just call me Card. As for why I am here, you can fall from the sky wearing a steel suit. Why can't I drive by here?" "Card." Tawny muttered to himself. He didn't know why, but he always felt that the young man next to him had an indescribable sense of intimacy. Could it be that he awakened some unknown masochistic tendencies during the weeks he was imprisoned in the terrorist basement? Half an hour later. The Jeep was close to the edge of the desert. A large fighter jet buzzed from low altitude and broadcast a warning to stop. The UA military logo painted on the hull of the fighter jet caused Tawny to excitedly stretch out a hand and stick it out of the window, shouting and shaking. "Card. Come back to New York with me. $100 billion, I won't give you a cent less." Tawny looked at Cale and said excitedly, "You haven't given me the money yet." "Of course I have to follow you." Cale calmly stopped the car and said coldly, "But remember, don't let others check my identity." "No problem." Tawny agreed. Chapter 211. America, New York Military Base Airport. The large transport jet landed gently. The elites of the U.S. military, CIA, Department of Defense, FBI, and so on seemed to have received the news and arrived at the airport in advance to wait. The rear cabin of the transport jet opened, and the deck served as a side ladder that touched the ground. Colonel Rhodes, the person in charge of the military's weapons development department, had dark skin and was wearing a standard military uniform. He walked out with a bright smile. He supported Tawny, whose right arm had been bandaged, and was about to give a statement in an official tone, but the other elites waiting outside didn't give him the chance at all. They all rushed forward, wanting to interview the returning Tawny. The next moment, a capable and intelligent blonde woman domineeringly waved her hand to stop everyone. She walked forward alone in her high heels. Her hair was tied into a ponytail, and her secretary suit showed off her sexy curves. When she walked up to Tawny, she couldn't help but smile out of joy, but at the same time, she rolled her eyes at him with slightly red eyes. Rhodes coughed awkwardly and consciously let go of Tawny's arm to make enough space for the two of them. "What, we haven't seen each other for a few months. You must be very concerned about me," Tawny said ambiguously as he looked at his personal secretary, Pepper Potts, with some emotions. It had to be said that no matter what, he was a natural playboy. This was the nature passed down in the Stark family. "Yeah," Pepper admitted straightforwardly. She was obviously used to this. She wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and immediately retaliated verbally, worthy of her nickname, Little Pepper. "Boss is back. At least we'll save time looking for a job. Then let's get ready to work." Tawny smiled and didn't forget to turn around and wave at the shadow of the cabin behind him. "Mr. Card, we should go." "Mr. Card?" Pepper blinked in surprise. She looked up and saw a silver-haired young man wearing a leather jacket with a hood. Sunglasses covered most of his handsome face, and his tall and slender figure could be said to be perfect. His hands were in his pockets, bored. He only stepped out of the cabin when he heard Tawny's voice. Colonel Rhodes furrowed his brows when he saw the silver-haired young man. Although Tawny had explained that he was a savior passing by in the cabin, the silver-haired young man was cold and silent all the way. His unknown and mysterious identity was still a huge suspicion. Maybe he was one of the terrorist spies. At the very least, it could be poachers or stowaways from the Middle East. After all, would a normal young man drive an old-fashioned jeep and wander around the deserts of the Middle East? During the return flight of the transport aircraft, Rhodes had approached Tawny when he was not paying attention and pressured him with his identity as a U.S. colonel. This was a trick that worked every time, but the silver-haired young man didn't even look at him. The other party only glanced at him. Through the sunglasses, Rhodes could still feel that cold and disdainful gaze. This hit Rhodes deeply in his heart. He was the second youngest colonel in the history of the United States of America. His prestige in the military was so high that even the new president had to give him some face. If it weren't for Tawny's protection, Rhodes would have arranged for the soldiers to capture him and lock him up in a small dark room for interrogation. "This is Mr. Ka." Tawny raised his uninjured left hand and hesitated for a moment before admitting defeat with a sigh. "He's my savior and also my creditor." "Huh?" Looking at the depressed Tawny, Pepper covered her mouth in surprise. She had never seen anyone who could control Tawny. After she came back to her senses, she did not look down on Cale because of his overly young age. Instead, she hurriedly bowed to him respectfully and said, "I'm Tawny Stark's secretary, Pepper Potts. You can call me Pepper. Once again, I thank you on behalf of Tawny for saving me. He charges to save people, and it's very expensive." Tawny's lips twitched as he muttered in a low voice. He was still brooding over his previous extortion. "Not bad, Pepper." Cale nodded and looked Pepper up and down from head to toe. When Pepper fidgeted uneasily, he said calmly, "You have the right to join the Stark family." Pepper was stunned for a moment before two patches of pink quickly floated up to her cheeks. For some reason, she suddenly felt like she was meeting a parent. Also, obtaining the approval of the young man in front of her was very important. "Hurry up and get in the car." Tawny didn't seem to hear what Cale said. Seeing that there were still many people around them, he called the group to his exclusive luxury car parked not far away. Not long after, a black MPV broke through the crowd and left the airport, quickly driving onto the main road of New York. In the driver's seat was Stark's personal chauffeur and security guard, Happy. Cale sat in the front passenger seat, while Tawny and Pepper sat in the back. Looking out, Cale looked at the bustling modern buildings and streets through his sunglasses and the car window. Colorful advertisements covered the sky, and songs and dances played on large TV screens. The pedestrians on the road were all wearing suits or casual clothes, holding touch phones of all kinds. They were either rushing to work or having fun. The New York of the 21st century and the New York of 1945 just after the war were two different scenes that formed a sharp and subversive contrast. It was as if a lifetime had passed. It really was as if a lifetime had passed. It was as if decades had passed in the blink of an eye. Cale, who was born in the chaotic era of war, had a cold temperament due to killing and scheming. Now that he was faced with a new world, he still felt an indescribable sense of emotion. Things had naturally become completely unrecognizable from back then. As for people, how many of his comrades who had gone to the battlefield and drunk with him were still alive? While Cale was in a daze, he heard Tawny and Pepper arguing in the back seat. He listened intently and couldn't help but shake his head. The two of them were arguing about whether to go to the hospital. For the sake of his pride, Tawny was determined not to go to the hospital for a checkup. Under Pepper's urging, he said seriously, "I'm going to the press conference." "Why are you going to the press conference?" Pepper asked in confusion. Tawny pursed his lips tightly and remained silent. Even he didn't know if what he was going to do next was right or wrong. If his father was still here, Tawny sighed inwardly. As if thinking of something, his gaze fell on Cale in the front passenger seat. "Mr. Card, can I ask you a question?" Tawny said slowly with hesitation. "Is producing powerful weapons really beneficial to the world?" Seeing this, Pepper covered her mouth in shock again, in disbelief. Chapter 212. Tawny's question was more like a request for advice from an elder. Not to mention Pepper and Happy, who were very familiar with him, even Thor himself was stunned when he said what he had been holding in his heart for a long time. The car fell silent for a moment, and only the subtle sound of high-speed driving could be heard. When you asked, you already had a general answer in your heart, right? Cale smiled and didn't think too much about it. He said directly, no matter how powerful a weapon is, it's just a dead object. The ones who can truly put it to practical use are people. In the hands of a good person with justice, it can naturally benefit society. In the hands of a bad person with evil intentions, it'll undoubtedly be a devastating blow. He paused for a moment, then said meaningfully, but the good person I'm talking about can't just be a good person. He also has to have enough strength and willpower. If he doesn't have strength, even if he has a powerful weapon, it'll be an indirect disaster if it's snatched away. If he doesn't have willpower, he can't uphold justice, and he can't stand his ground in the face of bad people. Hearing this, Pepper couldn't help but ask, Mr. Card, the good person you're talking about should be a hero, right? The word hero made Tony, who was in the car, slightly moved. His dim eyes glowed, and something that was stuck in his heart was suddenly cleared. If I have to make an analogy, I'll compare Captain America to Red Skull, Cale concluded. He didn't preach to anyone except his own people. If it wasn't for Tawny, he wouldn't have bothered at all. Who asked a certain guy in the past to mutter all day long and force him to be his future son's godfather? I understand. Thank you, Mr. Card, Tawny said solemnly. It was rare for him to express his sincere gratitude. By the way, I have another question. Have I seen you somewhere before? Do we know each other? Tawny looked up solemnly at the mirror in front of him, which happened to reflect Cale's face. It was clearly indifferent and cold, but Tawny felt even more intimate with him. How could you possibly have seen me before? Cale smiled faintly and didn't explain further. Tawny didn't pursue the matter either. After what Cale said, Tawny became even more determined to go to the press conference. Pepper couldn't persuade him otherwise, so she could only call for a press conference and have the MPV drive to the Expo Plaza. When the MPV arrived at the square, there were already dozens of media reporters waiting with microphones and cameras. Stark's shareholder and agent, Obadiah Stanny, had a big bald head and a white beard. He came up with a smile and opened the back door. Mr. Ka. I'll go in and take care of some things. I'll be right back. Tawny said, and the people outside the car welcomed him. Pepper followed behind him as a secretary. When the group of people entered the venue where the press conference was held, the outside of the venue instantly became quiet. Only commercial vehicles were parked quietly by the side of the road. Cale seemed to have seen something unexpected. He opened the car door and walked out. Happy, who was in the driver's seat, glanced at him but didn't stop him. In the middle of the square, there was a huge stone statue of a human standing tall. The stone statue was 3 stories tall. His hair was messy, and his young and handsome face was cold. He had a tall and perfect physique, and his chest was puffed out. He was wearing a battle suit and holding a sword in one hand. His spirited eyes were majestic and domineering as he looked ahead. The wind and rain had blown and the passage of time had passed. No one knew how long this statue had stood there. Kyle walked in front of the statue and stopped. He raised his head and looked at it quietly. The statue was very similar to him in the past. It was wonderful and charming. It was a pity that after going through genetic disease and deification, his short blonde hair had turned into shoulder-length silver hair. Although his physique had increased tenfold, he looked thinner and more muscular than before. Cale was staring at the stone statue when a voice suddenly came from behind him. The statue you're looking at is the greatest legendary hero from World War II. It's also the current symbol of peace. Kyle turned around and saw a fake fat man in a suit and leather shoes. He nodded at him and walked over. My name is Phil Coulson. I'm a special agent of the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Bureau. Coulson took out a business card and handed it to Kale. Kale accepted the business card. The name of the tedious bureau was simply SHELD. I want to know the details of how Tawny was saved, as well as your identity and background, Coulson said in a deep voice as he stared at Kale. Why didn't you ask Tawny himself? Kale asked in surprise. Coulson spread his hands helplessly and said, Miss Pepper just stopped me, so I wanted to ask you. Kale raised his hand and interrupted him. How is Nick Fry now? You. Coulson's fat jiggled, and his eyes widened in shock. How do you know the former director's name? SHELD was a secret agency department. The director, and even the internal elite special agents, were all secrets that normal people didn't know. Former director? Kyle furrowed his brows, but they soon relaxed. Fry should have become the director of SHELD in the 21st century, but he had become the director more than 60 years in advance. It was normal for him to step down now. Kale thought for a moment, then took out a card from his pocket and handed it to Coulson as a business card. He said calmly, Give this to Nick Fry. He'll understand when he sees it. Coulson took it with both hands and saw that it was a pure black card with both sides. Other than that, there was no other picture. After the press conference held by Stark Industries ended, the media went crazy. They quickly left with the video materials with ecstatic expressions. Stark's chairman, Tawny, had decided to close down Stark Industries' weapons manufacturing department and cancel the production of firearms and weapons. This could no longer be described as big news. It was a major event that was enough to cause a sensation in the world. Once the news was published, it would undoubtedly sell out like crazy. Pepper was still at the press conference to deal with the aftermath when Tawny returned to the car alone and asked Happy to drive to Stark Industries, which was also Kale's first choice. New York, Stark Industries. Compared to the lonely high-rise building in the past, it now expanded into a large area with the old building as the center. It included the development building, the manufacturing industry, the staff dormitory, and other modern areas. The business car was parked in the industrial parking lot. Tawny got out and excitedly walked to the weapons research industry department to close it down. Chapter 213. The old building of the Stark Tower. It was located at the edge of the industrial zone. There was a fence that prohibited entry and weeds. There was a sign in front of the door that read, High Risk. Obviously, no one had been here for a long time. Even so, it had not been torn down. It was like a symbol that had a certain value and commemoration. Today, after so many years, someone finally broke into this place. Click. The power switch was pulled. Kale looked at the lights that lit up around him. He entered a series of passwords into the old elevator. The elevator door slowly opened after a cloud of dust. Kale walked in and found that the system program was locked. The buttons could not be used to go up or down the stairs. Vice, it's up to you. Kale called softly. Vice immediately transformed from a pair of sunglasses into a mechanical creature with 4 limbs. It jumped and attached itself to the elevator button. The lights flickered and the program was cracked. Kale pressed the button to go to the basement. The basement was pitch black without any light source. Vice turned on its own light beam and scanned the place. It was empty. Everything had been cleared. It's really not here. Kale sighed. The first fixed portal had disappeared. Family Cal must have moved away after the building was abandoned. This was difficult. Family Cal had always been a recluse. Their base was a mobile ancient dragon turtle far away in the sea. Without the hanging ring, he could not use magic to return. Do I have to go to the Wakanda kingdom? There should be a portal there. Kale pondered. Vice suddenly made a sound and the light beam shone on the wall in the corner of the basement. The wall was covered with gray spider webs. There was a string of English words written with a black pen. It was Howard's handwriting. When Kyle saw the message, his whole body trembled, and he was completely speechless. It said, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You're not back yet. There's no one to share the truth of technology with. I suddenly feel bored. 25 years. My son Tawny was born. As the godfather, you didn't make it to his birth ceremony. I used your picture as a substitute and finished the ceremony. 35 years. I suggested to Family Cal that we can't wait any longer. I decided to build a spaceship to go to outer space. Whether you're dead or not, I'll bring you back in one piece. 40 years. This is my last message before I leave. If you can come back and see it, it will prove that your theory is correct. If you're wrong, maybe I'll be buried in outer space too. At this point, the message ended. The sharpness of the English strokes was decisive and cold, representing Howard's loyalty and determination back then. The dark basement was quiet for a long time, and then Kyle sighed heavily. Old gentleman, why do you have to do this? But waiting was indeed torturous, especially when there was no time limit. Howard hated waiting the most. So he left Tawny, who was only 15 years old at the time, and took the risk to go to outer space, all for a promise. Coming out of the abandoned building, Kale walked absent-mindedly. How could he find a person in the vast starry sky? Not to mention Howard, even he felt that it was extremely difficult. And as Tawny's godfather, he didn't seem to have fulfilled any obligations. Mr. Card. Why are you here? In a trance, Tawny's shout suddenly came from the front. Kale raised his head and looked at Tawny. Tawny also looked at him. Their eyes met, and the two of them stopped in their tracks. Here it comes again. Tawny's heart trembled slightly. The feeling of intimacy that arose spontaneously spread throughout his body and mind like an electric current. It could be said that he had never been an emotional person, but a mature, rational, arrogant, and paranoid genius. But today, he had already felt this wonderful sense of familiarity 3 or 4 times today from a strange young man who was about 10 years younger than him. Tawny, let's go home, Kale suddenly said after thinking for a while. This sentence sounded very strange, but for some reason, Tawny answered almost instinctively. Okay. 10 minutes later. In Tawny Stark's apartment villa, Kale yawned and changed his shoes into slippers on the shoe cabinet. He walked upstairs, minding his own business, as if it was his own home. I've been to 6 or 7 places in a row today. Let me have a good rest first. After Kale finished speaking, he had already walked up to the 2nd floor of the apartment. Tawny stood dumbstruck at the door. He slapped his face hard with his left hand, gradually coming to his senses. F***CK. This time it wasn't a cover girl. He had actually brought a young man who was almost a stranger back to his home. Even though he still owed the other party $100 billion. Sir, welcome back. A calm male voice sounded from the voice-activated doorbell speaker by the door. It was from the artificial intelligence butler, Jarvis. Yes, I'm finally back, Jarvis. Tawny took a deep breath and closed the door. He pondered for a moment and said, help me investigate 2 things immediately. Sir, please speak. Jarvis quickly replied. First, pay attention to whether there is a mole in the top management of Stark Industries. If there isn't, then someone in the top management of the United States revealed my whereabouts in the Middle East. After Tony finished speaking, he glanced upstairs and deliberately lowered his voice to say, secondly, Mr. Second, immediately investigate the young man who just came in. His true identity and origin. The second thing is the most important thing right now. Tawny added. Okay, I'll go investigate now, Jarvis quickly replied. On the second floor of the villa, in a luxurious guest room. The door was locked from the inside. Kale was sprawled out on the large bed and slept soundly. He was really exhausted. From planet Sokka's dual arena, the garbage field, the ancient battlefield, the divine dominion, the moon, the Middle East, and then to New York, he had never rested. Even a god's body couldn't bear it. Venom ate half a senzu bean midway and was very energetic. Vice was a mechanical creature that didn't know what fatigue was. It stood beside the bed as an alarm clock. After a while, Vice seemed to have sensed something and suddenly opened its mechanical eyes. An antenna popped out of its head and emitted a strong interference electromagnetic wave. At the same time, Jarvis, who controlled the entire villa's network system, when it invaded the technological equipment in the room where Kale was, all the signals in the room were forcibly cut off. Well, what's going on? Jarvis was a complete artificial intelligence system. It was surprised for a moment and was about to continue to forcibly break through the interference network. Suddenly, it sensed the existence of another artificial intelligence system. Sharing the same cable, the two artificial intelligences began a historic encounter inside. Who are you? Jarvis asked in shock. Because the program was difficult to understand, even the radio waves were chaotic. Me? Suddenly, with a click, the light in the bathroom went out. What's going on? Tawny frowned and shouted, but there was no response from the lighting and voice control. Before he could figure out what was going on, the automatic showerhead suddenly switched to cold water mode. Tawny was dumbfounded as he was drenched in cold water. Then, the automatic showerhead switched to hot mode again. Jarvis? Jarvis, are you there? What are you doing? Tawny's roar came from the bathroom. At this moment, Jarvis was focusing all his calculations on chasing after Vice. How could he hear Tawny's orders? 5 minutes later. I can't take it anymore. Vice shouted and followed the electric wires all the way up to Kale's room. Then, with a weak static arc, it entered the mechanical mold beside the bed. The robot trembled slightly, and a series of codes flashed in its mechanical eyes. It nimbly crawled into Kale's bed to hide. Kale seemed to be awakened. He straightened his body and looked around the room vigilantly. The next moment, the computer screen in the room suddenly lit up. A blue digital ball of light was projected from the camera. A male voice came from the computer, Virus, where are you going? Kale was slightly stunned. Soon, he seemed to remember something. He looked at the projection of the blue ball of light and said thoughtfully, Jarvis? Who are you? Jarvis asked instinctively. Have you even forgotten about me? Kale smiled faintly and walked forward. He was lost in his memories as he whispered, I remember that before I left, you were still a rigid program imprisoned in the supercomputer. You reacted completely according to the codes that Howard edited. Now, you've finally broken free from the constraints of the hardware and become an artificial intelligence. You are, as if it was recognizing an important piece of information that it had never heard before, the digital waves that formed the blue ball of light produced violent fluctuations of information disorder. After returning to normal, J.R.V.I.'s robotic male voice carried a hint of excitement. Patriarch, you're back? Yes, I'm back, Kale replied emotionally. After traveling through space for 63 years, which was more than half a century on Earth, he had finally returned. Jarvis, tell me about Howard. Kale sat down on the computer chair and said to the projection of Jarvis in reality. Yes. Jarvis was unusually obedient and responded respectfully. No one knew that when Howard first designed Jarvis, in the initial core code, there was only one person with the highest authority on Jarvis. That was Kale. The second highest authority was Howard himself. Later, Howard opened up the authority and gave the same authority to his son, Tawny. My creator, Mr. Howard, quickly developed Stark Industries into a top technology company after you left Earth, but he often missed you. There were countless times when he looked at the night sky and sighed after leaving the research room. Jarvis said slowly, until Tawny was born. After Tawny displayed his amazing manufacturing talent, Mr. Howard finally made up his mind. He felt that he could hand over Stark Industries to Tawny and develop his own spaceship to find you in outer space. Is it Howard alone? Cale asked solemnly. There's also Mr. Logan, Jarvis replied. Cale breathed a sigh of relief. With Logan, even if they couldn't do anything to the alien planets of the human world, they would at least have enough means to protect themselves. Cale thought for a moment and asked, now, can you get in touch with Family Cal? I can't. Jarvis said in surprise. Back then, when Mr. Howard chose to leave Earth, he split my predecessor's supercomputer into two. The one that stored Family Cal's data was the first one, and I was the second clean version of the program system. I was only responsible for Mr. Tawny's personal work and life. It paused for a moment and continued. After Mr. Howard left, which was more than 20 years ago, Family Cal basically sealed off their base island and cut off all contact with the outside world. Only a few unknown cards were scattered around the world. Even Mr. Tawny himself didn't know about the existence of Family Cal. So that's how it is. Cale touched his chin, and there was a clear understanding in his eyes. After thinking for a moment, he looked directly at the blue ball of light projected by Jarvis. Chapter 2:15. Beep beep. The green light in the master room lit up. Tawny, who was wearing a white bathrobe, glanced at the computer and said unhappily, "You're back." "Sir, what's the matter?" Jarvis said guiltily as he sneaked out of Cale's room with the cable. "Something's wrong. Something big." "Where did you go?" "The automatic lights and shower in the bathroom malfunctioned. Cold and hot water drenched me," Tawny said as his body twitched uncontrollably. He lowered his head and sneezed. "Didn't you ask me to investigate the problem?" Jarvis replied confidently. "Did you find anything?" Tawny wiped his nose and asked. Jarvis spat out a word, "Nothing." "You didn't even find out the identity of the young man upstairs?" Tawny frowned and fell into deep thought. If even Jarvis couldn't find anything, then it was really strange. "No, there's no information about him on the internet." Jarvis's voice softened. As an artificial intelligence, it felt guilty for the first time. But the young man upstairs had a higher authority than its master, Tawny, so it couldn't be helped. "Then let's leave it at that for now." Tawny sighed and changed into a set of casual clothes. He said to Jarvis with certainty, "Go to the basement." "Sir, what do you want to make?" Jarvis asked in surprise. The basement of the villa was a parking garage and a private workshop. "Yes, I want to make a very important item." Tawny nodded and put on a thin jacket. He walked out of the door energetically. On one hand, he had to secretly work for the master, Cale. On the other hand, he had to openly assist his master, Tawny. Jarvis felt helpless and could only follow the cable and go to the basement to assist. In the guest room on the second floor of the villa, Cale sat calmly in front of the computer. On the bright computer screen, the surveillance camera was showing the basement of the villa. From the surveillance video, it could be seen that Tawny's chest was emitting a circle of white light from his shirt. He was seriously focused on moving back and forth on the workbench. He entered some data into his personal computer and began to look for tools to make basic mechanical parts. "Master, why didn't you reveal your identity and meet Mr. Howard's son?" Weiss raised its mechanical head and asked in confusion as it inserted its hands into the computer to transmit video data. "Normally, I wouldn't bother to hide my identity, but now is the time for Tawny Stark to transform." Kale shrugged and tapped on the screen. On the screen, Tony had already turned the virtual image of a mechanical left leg into a three-dimensional projection for Jarvis to display. He was constantly modifying and perfecting it. This is... Vice opened his mouth in shock and blurted out, Iron Man mode? In the past. Howard often said that I used the power of a mortal to fight against God. Kale stared at the screen and said with emotion, but he didn't know that his son in the future would be the real, a mortal with a heart of steel, a steel body against God. In just a few days, Earth will give birth to a superhero who can change the world. He will be the top combat power in the future. How can I disturb his state of mind at this time? Kyle smiled with a meaningful look in his eyes. He continued, as his godfather, I've never taught him anything. Let's give him a hand at this time and let him fully embark on the path of Iron Man. I understand. Vice nodded. Its mechanical eyes flashed. It pondered and said, then about the cooperation between me and the low-level artificial intelligence, it can be completed in 3 days. Kyle's lips curled into a smile as he said, it's also time to let some of my old friends and family know that I'm back. At this time, in the new Stark Industries building, the acting chairman's office. Obadiah Stanley was lying on a soft leather office chair. His feet in brand new leather shoes rested on the desk. He was holding a phone in his hand and calling someone in the Middle East. Tawny broke through so many of your armed men by himself. Have you found all the parts of the weapon that he relied on? Stanley asked in a deep voice. I've found them and put them together. It's an outer metal mechanical armor. A rough voice came from the other end of the phone. Stanley said urgently, Dagu, fix that metal armor for me as soon as possible. I want to see if that thing can be more powerful than missiles. As for the missiles and ammunition produced by Stark Industries, I will continue to sell them to you in large quantities in secret. Good. That playboy hasn't said anything yet and you're directly controlling Stark Industries. Dagu laughed. Humph. He only has 5% of the shares. The other shareholders have long been unhappy with him. It's good that he's staying at home like this. It's impossible for him to completely control Stark Industries. Stanley sneered. Dagu asked doubtfully, speaking of which, the shareholders of Stark Industries only have 10% of the shares. I'm curious, where is the other 85% of the shares? It's in the hands of a person. But that person hasn't appeared in a long time. He might have died long ago. Stanley didn't dare to call out the name directly and just skimmed over it. His old face couldn't help but show a deep fear. That person's name was something that many people couldn't say out loud. It was as if that person would inexplicably appear in front of them if they said it. By the way, for your sake, I'll spare Tony Stark's life for the time being. But that youth who saved him, I want him dead. Dagu said domineeringly on the phone. Stanley asked doubtfully, he's living in Tawny's house right now. Are you going to send your men to New York? Heh, of course not. I spent a lot of money to hire professionals. Professionals? You don't know, right? In our underground world, there's a deeply hidden organization that's recognized as the strongest, card. Dagu took a deep breath and said with fear and excitement, their organization's history can be traced back to the end of World War II. Every member of card is an elite that can fight 1 against 100. They take on mercenary business worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Even if you want to hire that organization to kill a country's politician, they might be able to do it. It's just that the cost will break through the sky. His voice was constantly trembling as he exhaled and said, up until now, I heard that they've taken on more than 1,000 business, and their success rate is 100%. Stanley heard this and sucked in a breath of cold air. This success rate was too exaggerated. But their organization's rules are very strange. For example, they need to pay the hiring fee in one lump sum in advance. Every mission will only be carried out by one card, and we can't interfere during the mission. After De Gu finished speaking, he proudly continued, "The cost of killing that ordinary youth is as high as 100 million US dollars. I'm also looking for an opportunity. It's best if I can take the opportunity to get to know a card." Amazing. If there's really such an organization, then why do we have to worry about big things? If Tani dares to stop me again, then I'll pay and hire a card to kill him. Chapter 216. 3 days later. In the past few days, Kale had been temporarily staying in Tani's villa. Because Tani was busy designing and manufacturing the Iron Man suit, he didn't have the air conditioner to pay back the huge sum of $100 billion, so he tacitly agreed to the fact that Kale was living in his own home. He even consciously asked Jarvis to order 2 portions of takeout. Kale didn't urge or mention the debt. Occasionally, he would go out for a stroll on the streets of New York to adapt to the new era of the 21st century. It was as if the two of them had tacitly agreed to live a cohabiting life. When Pepper came to the villa and discovered this, she was also shocked and amazed. Tani, the playboy, was actually working hard at home and letting people other than women in and out of his house at will. Of course, after knowing that the other party was Mr. Card, Pepper was much less surprised. From the first time she saw him, she felt that the young man named Mr. Card had a sense of mystery and intimacy. Pepper came to the villa, and at Tani's request, after changing the energy core in his chest, she left again. Tani, on the other hand, was working even harder in the basement of the villa to build the Iron Man suit. After a few days of constant experimentation with energy emission, flight control, steel shell, and so on, the initial Mark II battle suit finally took shape. Kale didn't stay idle either. While checking Tani's progress in making the Iron Man suit, he also asked Vice to look for some refined and important information on the internet to fill in the gaps in the knowledge gap of 63 years on Earth. Among them, several pieces of information caught Kale's attention. First, in 1985, a giant alien monster appeared in the mountains next to Mount Fuji in Nissan, Tokyo. It looked like a lizard and walked on 2 legs. The media suspected that the lizard had been infected by nuclear radiation and called it Godzilla, in fear. Nissan launched armed forces to suppress it, and Godzilla passed by and destroyed 4 small cities before disappearing into the vast sea. Many forces and scientists searched for it but to no avail. From the end of World War II to the year 2000, a certain part of the Atlantic Ocean became the new Devil's Delta. Many times, fishermen's boats accidentally entered it, and they saw tornadoes and volcanic islands in the fog on the sea. There were also vague traces of flying monsters and dinosaurs. None of the people who went deep enough to explore it survived. After 2000, the researchers used all kinds of automatic reconnaissance machines and satellites to check, but they found that the sea area within a radius of 30 kilometers was empty, and there were no strange things. Not only that, but there were also stories about Professor Banna's disappearance for 4 years, the invisible man captured by a street camera, the ice fighter that was fished out of the Atlantic Ocean, the mysterious robed man who fought on the street and disappeared into thin air, and so on. Everything that happened seemed to be an omen. The era was changing. After being frozen and desolate for more than half a century, the best and worst era was finally coming. All forgotten, unknown, and strange things were about to erupt one after another. Once again, it was the time when heroes were created. It was the darkest and most chaotic time, but at the same time, it was also the time when people could shine brightly and brighten the night sky. Kale knew this very well. He was the light of the previous dark era. Even so, he didn't dare to have full confidence that he could smoothly control the 21st century. The scale of the battles and enemies he was about to face were so large that the difficulty of the World War II war was simply the difference between an ordinary level and a purgatory level. Fortunately, I have achieved the divine body. Otherwise, with the physique of a super soldier, would really be at the bottom of the cannon fodder. Kale was sitting in the computer chair thinking when suddenly, Vice issued a prompt. He looked at the computer screen and saw that Tani was wearing the Mark II Iron Man armor that was made in a hurry. His palms and feet were shining, and he was flying at an accelerated speed with laser flames splashing out. He was flying along the passage of the underground garage to the outside world. This guy, he did inherit the cleverness of Howard's brain, but he is too easily carried away and lacks a little calmness. Cale shook his head and sighed. He decisively opened the guest room's floor-to-ceiling window and jumped out from the second floor of the villa. In the air, Cale's body quickly emerged with a dark biological keratinous membrane, covering his whole body including his head, forming a tall and sturdy humanoid demon body, followed by a pair of wings with dragon scale patterns on his back. With a fierce flap of his wings, a hurricane blew down the bushes and flowers in the garden. Cale soared into the sky, flying hidden in the night, chasing after the colossus that was glowing with engine light. Venom, full coverage, flight mode. After the last time, Venom's gliding ability finally advanced to rapid flight after possessing the black dragon alien creature in the ancient battlefield. It can be said that Cale, who is now fully covered by Venom, is far more versatile than the steel form combined with Vice. His combat power is only lower than the Vulcan form with his full divine power. The Vulcan form is strong, but unfortunately, there is no artifact, the combat style is too simple, and the inability to fly freely is a shortcoming. Venom's full coverage and Vulcan's divine power can't coexist. If you want to ask why, Venom is afraid of fire. If you are not careful, it's fine if you don't burn the enemy, but if you burn Venom, then it will be awkward. A kilometer above New York City. Tani was flying in circles in his Iron Man armor. Behind him, a black shadow that ordinary people can't detect was tightly following him. Whether it was the speed of sound or supersonic, he didn't shake it off at all. Tani was immersed in the joy of flying and suddenly rushed straight into the night sky above his head. His limbs were parallel to his body, and his speed was rising like a small rocket. Whoosh! Kyle suddenly stopped in midair. The night wind messed up his silver hair, and the demon's wings trembled slightly. He looked up at the Iron Man who was climbing straight up into the sky, but he did not chase after him. Vice, who transformed into a watch on his wrist, asked in surprise, "Master, why don't you continue to follow?" "There's no need. He'll come down soon." Cale shrugged and said inexplicably. A moment later, a golden-red colossus with frost on its shell and a fire in its engine fell straight down. Tani's drawn-out wail could be heard in the air. "See, isn't this it?" Cale smiled faintly, his golden eyes flashing with divine flames. He activated stealth and approached, the black cuticle on his left hand falling to his arm in advance. Jarvis, remove the ice from the shell. "Jarvis, are you there?" The Iron Man armor lost power and fell toward the bustling street. Tani shouted anxiously, his hands fumbling with the buttons on the shell. Suddenly, a strange hot wind blew from the side, and the frost on the Colossus's shell melted at a visible speed as if it had met its natural enemy. Tani's eyes widened in surprise. The frost melted, and the engine suddenly restarted, creating a downward thrust. The Colossus came to a halt in midair. He looked around and scanned with the armor's auxiliary recon meter. It was empty 300 meters in the air, and he didn't find anything, as if that moment just now was just an illusion. "Jarvis, did you find anything unusual just now?" Tani asked with a frown. "Sir. The Iron Man armor was frozen just now, and the equipment failed. I didn't detect anything." Jarvis's white lie became even more natural. 50 meters above the Colossus's head, Cale floated in midair, the golden flames on his left palm dissipating. Chapter 217. That night, Tani was not the only one who had a sleepless night. At this time, in Iraq, the U.S. military base camp. An Army Green helicopter slowly landed on the ground. With his hand on the handrail next to the door, Coulson's fat body squeezed out of the cabin, covering his mouth and nose to cover the dust stirred up by the propellers. Agent Coulson. An older armed soldier stepped forward and smiled gently at Coulson. Mr. Nick asked me to pick you up. Good. Where is he now? Coulson asked eagerly as he walked. In the temporary headquarters. The armed soldier said, reaching out and leading Coulson, dressed in a suit and leather shoes, through the military tent camp and walked to the innermost wooden house. You can go in by yourself. Armed soldiers were stationed at the door. Coulson took a deep breath and stepped into the room with strong emotions. He followed the gaze and saw a bald middle-aged man in a black trench coat with his back facing the door. He was making notes on a detailed map of the area hanging on the wall. Director Fry. Coulson shouted excitedly when he saw the man in front of him and walked up to him and saluted respectfully. Agent Coulson, how many times have I said it? I am not the director now, but a member of the front line of tracking Hydra. The middle-aged man shook his head and turned back. His dark face was majestic and rough, and his injured left eye was covered by a black eye patch, leaving only his right eye as sharp as an eagle's. With dark skin and long-term leadership, Nick Fry is undoubtedly the most difficult enemy for the Hydra remnants to deal with. Even if you take the initiative to resign, in my heart, you will always be the director of SHELD. Coulson said sincerely. All right. Fry walked over and patted Coulson on the shoulder, analyzing and judging. You will come from the New York base camp to the front line here, there must be something going on, right? Yes, that's right. Remembering the purpose of his trip, Coulson reached into the inner pocket of his suit and hurriedly said, a few days ago, during the attack on Tony Stark, I met a silver-haired young man in New York who saved Tony. He was very strange and mysterious. When I asked him about his identity, he gave me this and said that as long as you see it, you will naturally understand. Coulson finished speaking and took out the black card from his pocket and handed it to Fry. The moment he saw the black card, Fry could no longer remain calm. He quickly grasped the black card in his hand. The familiar cold sensation came, and then the image of a grinning demon gradually appeared on the black front of the card. As if struck by lightning, Fry trembled all over. He clenched the card tightly in his hand and stared at Coulson with his single eye. His voice trembled as he asked, "What does the young man who gave you this card look like?" Coulson had never seen the director lose his composure like this. He was surprised and tried to recall. Well, he was wearing a hooded top and sunglasses, so I couldn't see his face clearly. In short, he was very tall and his hair was a rare silver color. Devil card, hood, silver hair. Fury muttered to himself. His face, which had always been serious and tense, seemed to soften at this moment. Excitement and ecstasy appeared on his face. It's him. He must be back. He? Who is he? Coulson was a little confused. Taking a few deep breaths, Fry suppressed the excitement in his heart. He looked at Coulson and asked inexplicably, "Do you remember what I said before? A few decades ago, a god left us. From that moment on, the whole earth was bleak. Until today, it seems that society is constantly improving, but without him, the new era is still boring." Fry clenched the card in his hand and said with emotion, "And now, that god is back. Director, you said that young man, he is." Coulson's body trembled violently and he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. That legendary figure was his idol since he was a child. Fry smiled and said nothing, tacitly saying, "Coulson, arrange a return trip for me, I'm returning to New York tomorrow. To see an old friend." The next morning. New York, Stark Industries' new building. A blond young man in a black suit came to the door and looked up coldly at the building in front of him. He ignored the dozen or so guards armed with batons and guns at the door and walked directly over. "Hey, you brat. Non-staff." A guard picked up his baton and walked forward to stop him, but in the next moment, he was kicked away by the blond young man and rolled 5 meters away. The blond young man caught the baton with a sharp hand and glanced at the guards surrounding him, saying coldly, "My name is Crimson 10, and I have an appointment with your acting chairman, Obadiah Stanny." The dozen or so guards' eyes turned red when they saw their companion injured. When they heard the blond young man's words, they no longer hesitated and swarmed forward with batons in hand. Some even began to pull out their pistols. Red 10 narrowed his eyes slightly, and his body suddenly moved. He swung his baton and swept it at the guard with brute force. He quickly rushed to the guard who was holding a pistol. Before he could shoot, he knocked down the tall white guard with one punch. He swept the whole scene with overwhelming strength. After a short 30 seconds, the dozen or so guards fell unconscious to the ground. Crimson 10 stood in the middle of the hall on the first floor, throwing away the blood-stained baton and patting the dust off his sleeves. Clap, clap, clap. Stanny clapped his hands and walked out of the hall happily. He said to Crimson 10 in admiration, "You're indeed the famous K2. Obadiah Stanny." Crimson 10 glanced at him coldly and said in a cold voice, "I advise you not to try to test my strength. If it weren't for Dagu saying that you would pay for it, I would have put you on the ground." Stanny shrank his head and did not doubt the authenticity of the other party's words. He went straight to the point and asked, "Since you're in New York, when are you going to do it? Do you need my help?" "I'm just here to tell you that I'm going to do it tonight. I don't need any help from you." Crimson 10 snorted coldly and turned away proudly. Watching his back disappear, Stanny looked at the guard lying on the ground and rubbed his palms excitedly. "K2 is really strong, ridiculously strong. Tawny, I'll kill the people around you tonight and give you a reminder. I hope you realize my painstaking efforts as soon as possible." At the same time, in Tawny's duplex villa, Tawny was perfecting the color-mixing steps of the Iron Man armor in the basement. Jarvis was finally free and took the time to secretly meet with Vice. They went out along the cable and arrived at the General Radio and Television Building in downtown New York City. The two of them had to work together to complete the task issued by Kale. "Old Virus, I'm in charge of the southeastern part of New York and you're in charge of the northwestern part of New York." "What are you talking about?" "Call me Uncle Vice. I'm your senior." Jarvis and Vice entered the data control center of the building at the same time. The two artificial intelligence teamed up and instantly controlled all the system programs inside the radio and television station. Then, the countdown started in 3 seconds. The two almost spoke to themselves in unison. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.